I know, don't you hate that? Did it today in Macy's with issues.
Great. I am calling this meeting to order. Item number 2 is those present. I'm seeing all of the town council here and accounted for. We're also joined by the town manager and our Tiger team for the GMO that we've been working with, Karen and Autumn from SEDCO and from Planning Department. So for today, what we're going to be covering is the GMO. So I'm going to pull up the slides. And I'm just going to ask for the counselors to give Nick and I probably approximately 30 minutes to just kind of walk through the material and share some key highlights that we want. Most of the time talking about the concept and getting input, ideas, and feedback. So just jumping to the first slide. So Councilor McGee and I were asked back in September to take action on making some recommendations to the GMO. And really our deadline is April 5th. And so we've been doing a lot of work with our Tiger team and engaging the committees and other folks to really try and get some ideas going. And so what we have today is really a concept. It's not our final recommendation. I suspect what comes to this council in April 5th, on April 5th will look different than what we have, but we want to get feedback from the counselors and make sure you guys understand what we've heard, how we've tried to apply that, but also want to make sure we're getting input from the council as well in terms of things you'd like to see, things we've missed. It's not perfect. And the goal is to kind of between now and April 5th, get it better. We also want to make sure we're continuing to engage the public. So we have a Counselor Corner Live on March 2nd at 6 p.m. at the Public Safety Building. And there we want to hear more from the public and share or get that feedback into the concept. We're targeting to try and have something for the council by Friday, March 31st, so that we can actually have that as the first read on April 5th. And then from there, the intent will be to have a extended public comment period. So we're not just rushing to move through the normal process, make sure we figure out, and we could probably use help from the communications committee to think through what's the best way to leverage that extended time to make sure we're allowing for more feedback from the public. So in terms of the problem statement, it really was, we have a GMO, we did good work to get it there, but there were some issues or problems that I think as we've worked through it that we needed to address. So I won't spend a lot of time on this, but it really is just making sure that, there were some things in the back of our minds as we were approaching this that we wanted to consider and figure out, is there a better solution? Can we improve it? We've heard clearly from residents that the current pace has been too fast. There's too much uncertainty in the pace of growth, different viewpoints on the exemption process and how much we have exempted. There's issues essentially with the GMO in our planning process. It's really restricted the pace of development in the CPD zone, which isn't in conflict with our comprehensive plan. It's introduced a lot of subjectivity and politics into the process. And again, I think the hope is we can come up with a solution that does the best we can to address some of these. Again, we won't address them all, we won't do them all perfectly, but these are some things that, Councilor McGee and I have tried to think about as we've gone through the process. And kind of out of that, we established some key principles that we wanted to kind of prioritize as we were putting together our concept. And so really the inputs came from the survey that we did. One, general feedback we've gotten since then from the public that really kind of, I think all of us have had several conversations with the public on growth since then to kind of really understand what the concerns were. We decided to try and engage the committees. So all of the town committees and over 100 individuals from committees and town staff to really get their unique lens on growth and what it means for the town. And then also spend some time with developers to understand what their perspective was. So again, I think one of the key things we tried to take seriously as we worked through this was the feedback we got from the townwide survey that really indicated concern from the perspective of the pace of growth in Scarborough. And so that's a real legitimate concern that we need to be thinking about as we look at this and how do we best address it. you know, when you think about that, you know, again, a lot of the feedback I feel like we heard from the public was this perspective that growth impacts their quality of life, right? And then when you look at the survey too, and you say, well, how are we performing in other areas? We're actually doing pretty decent for the most part, except where it relates to traffic flow. That's really kind of a key area that I think correlates closely to this perspective of a fast pace and growth. So that really, to me, is an indicator of where, when people say it impacts quality of life, there's plenty other areas, I'm sure, but traffic flow really seems to be the big one. What's interesting, because I was just looking through the survey as we were preparing this, like, we as a town, across every question that we asked that there was national and regional benchmarks on, scored higher than the national average. So as a town, we're performing really, really well in terms of delivering services. The one area, the one question, actually two questions, that we were below benchmark was growth and leadership. That was, you know, kind of the two questions that, you know, were the ones that, compared to national and regional averages, we as a town are underperforming. So the GMO is important, but we also need to put in context some of the other tools that we have. So growth management, the GMO is one of our tools in our toolkit, and there are other tools that we need to use. And I think as we've met with the committees and got feedback, a lot of the really great ideas we got weren't necessarily things that the GMO is going to fix. It's things we need to look at in zoning, with our impact fees, that I think will really address some of the quality concerns that people have, that we've been so focused on the GMO as the primary tool. We have not been necessarily looking at some of these other things with the same intensity. And so the hope is we can get past the GMO so that we can dig into some of these other areas that really, I think, will also like show that we're doing true growth management as a town. So this is our current map that was in the comprehensive plan. You can see where our current high growth areas are. So that big circle is the CPD zone. And then we have the other designated growth areas, which is really Oak Hill and Dunstan. And so this is just something we need to think about as we're directing the pace of growth, because according to a comprehensive plan, this is where we want to see the majority of growth in Scarborough. So just looking backwards at where we've come from in terms of number of units, this just gives everybody a view on the average. So in 2010, you know, it was a relatively low number, likely mostly focused on single family housing. And then in the past decade, there's been more of an emphasis on multifamily housing. And so that's really been the primary driver of these total number of units. I think it's important to understand that, you know, not every unit is equal. So a single family home and a one bedroom apartment, while they're kind of being considered equal in terms of count here, what they mean in terms of impact to, you know, the cost to serve and other things are not quite equal. But again, in terms of total units that have been put in Scarborough, this gives a view that shows a pretty high rate of growth over the past decade. So that matters because when we look at how we define our state minimum average, you know, as the council knows, you know, it's really based on the 10-year rolling average plus 5%. You know, what we in the public are most familiar with is this 144 number, which is currently the number in our GMO that's our minimum. This is looking at it through the lens of growth permits, and our recommendation, we're trying to pivot away from permits and really focus on true number of units that are being built. So we're moving from this column to this column to really be clear on what is our pace of growth and what's our average. So if we were to consider every unit a unit as we've described in our current ordinance, and we're continuing to do and recommend in this next one, if we were to apply that same 10-year average, the minimum would be 224. So that would be kind of, and that's an important anchor for us to think about, because that's the number that if we're saying, you know, what's been our 10-year average as we look forward, the 224 is really reflective of all the different unit mixes that we have. Again, this is gonna lead more towards multifamily, so not every unit is essentially equal. Nick, you wanna talk about this slide?
Sure. So for the existing GMO, as you know, I don't need to spend a whole lot of time, but most of us know that we had allowed for 144 total permits per year. Now, there's a couple things to remember about that, which is there are exemptions. So all affordable housing, manufactured housing, gift lots, and then we have the manufactured housing, as well as the 289 that were exempted through a council vote in October, I believe. Those are all exempted from the current GMO. So the 144 number is not necessarily what we've been sticking to. We had all these other ways for units to be built in this community without really counting them towards that 144 number. Exemption process to be heard through the town council if the unit is designated in a growth area and was a part of a mixed use or multifamily or provides a public benefit. So what we were also seeing, and the reason why we kind of hit the pause button, was we were getting exemption requests from the GMO, and it was really chewing up a lot of either the council's time, staff's time. We know they've invested a lot of time, and including the developers. They have spent a lot of time trying to figure us out, and I think that's probably one of the drawbacks to what the current GMO is. And I think that's something we've tried to address through this new proposal. Current GMO summary. We have oh, I'm sorry, I'm on the next slide, Barry. Yeah. So what we're saying, the current GMO is really allowing right now, 2023, 2024, and 2025 is 301, 301, and 250. That's a realistic look at what our current GMO sits. That's what we're really allowing in town. We received a lot of, for those that didn't know or didn't hear about it, we did send out surveys to department heads, committees, and solicited feedback. And we developed the survey questionnaire. And I want to just say that the response was enormous. I think over 90% of the people that we asked to respond did respond and provided us some incredibly valuable feedback as we went through this process. So just to highlight some of the committees that we approached: community services, conservation, housing, library, long-range planning, planning board, SEDCO, sustainability, transportation, zoning board of appeals. And then also with the town staff, we did fire, police, public works, engineering, and assessing. Survey results. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time going through each of these slides. It was all in the packets. And I think what you'll see though is we have kind of a highlighting of what these surveys results that we found interesting, which is where this slide is. These are ideas that came back from those surveys that I think the council should be considering as we talk about this, which the Tiger team did spend some time considering some of these items. But I think this it's a good exercise for your brain to get it going when you think about the GMO. So some of the interesting ideas we heard was removing the CPD from the GMO, addressing growth in the zoning ordinance and placing limits and thresholds for development. Getting ahead on the public benefit side, adding to the list of ordinances that should be required. Unit type does matter. Not all are equal in impact. And for those of us with some memory towards this, we had fractionalization for a little while. We had reserve pools for a little while. And those were clearly early attempts at addressing or basically understanding that not all units were created equal. So mixed use should be exempt in growth areas. Growth is not all bad, provides opportunities for the things we want. And then there are ongoing conflicts with goals which need to be managed. We want transit, but density can seem overwhelming. So the council needs to look at the whole system to figure out the balance, which is kind of where we're taking that step forward here with this meeting. Creating a select committee to evaluate annual growth in town. And that would be separate from ordinance discussions. So those are some of the ideas that we heard back on those surveys. We did conduct a developer feedback session. We had really good participation in that as well. And I think to highlight some of their concerns, Councilor Anderson and I were both on that. And I think they also make some good points in the sense that One, predictability. It's really important as you're a developer and you go through what is a very lengthy town process, that the process that you have laid out will remain in place as you go through it. And I think that predictability factor is a huge one for them. The other big takeaway I would say from our discussions with them is there was a sense that some of the benefits of their development haven't been really talked about or communicated well out to the community, which would include expanding our tax base. They have shown numbers wise to have added to the town coffers, and presumably we'll be able to do bigger and better things with the extra money, including whether it's infrastructure or schooling or whatever it may be. They have created some ability for us to be more flexible with our funds. So that was kind of the bulk of the developer feedback. And anything else? Any high point?
Next slide.
Next slide. Let's see, this is more of their feedback for anyone that wants to actually go through it line by line. That's right there in the packet for you. And then GMO proposal. I'm gonna let John take it back over.
All right, so we probably went through like 10 different iterations, and we probably would have gone through another 20. Where we were like, we need to get in front of the council and share something and just put our best idea at this point in front of you guys and get some reactions. And so again, totally open for feedback. If we missed something that's important to you that we need to be including as we consider this going forward, if we want to hear that tonight. Again, we need your guys' help and getting this to a point that we all feel comfortable that we can support when this comes forward for a first reading. So again, what the way we're looking at this is really 3 separate areas. One is the rural and single family districts. That includes Running Hill Road. And so I'll show in a second the map that really kind of shows where all of those properties are, to kind of give a sense of the fact that, pretty much 80 to 90% of our growth in that area is going to be significantly limited to 25 units per year. Then in our growth areas, which is predominantly in Oak Hill and Dunstan, we're going to be focusing not on an annual growth target, but on a pool that we will put forward for 3 years. So the rationale to move away from an annual target versus a pool is really to think about how we support larger multifamily projects where, it's really hard to get the permits that are needed, that we need to have a multi-year pool that's available to support the building and also the site plan approval and things like that, that we're going to be suggesting as a requirement to issue those permits. Again, we're still trying to limit the number of 3 bedrooms or greater to kind of retain, lower cost to serve options. And then the third area is the CPD, which we took that feedback from the committees of. The CPD really is unique. It's unique in terms of our comp plan, in terms of what we're trying to do there. And so allowing for a similar concept of a pool over a 3-year period that's available to support, multifamily development. One of the things that staff has also recommended that's not necessarily going to be a GMO, but might be another zoning recommendation that will come with this, is that we also amend the CPD to make it so that there's a maximum number of units allowed in the CPD, which I think doing some numbers, it's around 2,100. That would be the recommendation, which is pretty consistent with the 2,000 target that we've heard in the past. And then also trying to keep a maximum of the 3 bedrooms there.
John, can I ask a question at this point? So in this slide, in terms of the areas you've chosen, it seems to me there's sort of like some double dipping there. So you've identified growth areas, then you've also talked about CPD.
Mm-hmm.
So isn't the Crossroads Planning District in both of those areas? I mean, and you've also introduced a new term, a regional growth area. So what is that?
Sorry, it's our growth areas. And I think you're right, it does include the CPD as well. So there really are, going back to this slide, this one, these big circles, these are designated growth areas.
So help me with regional growth area. When I hear regional, it kind of makes me.
Maybe I can help if you'll go on. I think
That's why we've included the maps. We have redefined this a bit. So this is important for area one. So we've actually further clarified, rather than just the growth areas and the rural areas, we've added some zoning districts behind it. So it's really clear exactly where. And so area one, all of these districts, R2, R3, R4, these would all be included in the low density growth area and rural that you would only have 25 per year. And if you skip ahead to 2, so this is the growth areas outside of the CPD.
Okay.
So this is where you would allow 300 every 3 years. So we're essentially grouping the town into 3 different areas that allow residential based on zoning. And so when you look at it in the map format, it's really, I think, telling about where you would actually see growth. And so that's a little different than what we have now.
Could you tell me what the little pink semicircle is there, kind of a reverse Florida or whatever it looks like there?
So that's, the pink is B3, it's general business.
Okay,
And it allows for a little bit of mixed use. And then you have the village residential districts, the Highest Parkway district.
Okay.
So those are the targeted areas for this specific part of the growth areas. And then the CPD is treated separately with its own.
okay.
And the regional was just a term that was used in the comprehensive
Okay.
plan when
No
describing
particular
Mhm.
that.
market,
Mhm.
Implying big obligations to your,
No,
anyway, southern Maine area.
it assumed that the Downs was really going to be a regional draw because of the downtown and other things, but it doesn't have any specific
Okay.
description other than saying that is our most intense area
Great.
for growth.
Thank you.
And so again, just, what's consistent with this in our comprehensive plan is that, really part of our plan is trying to preserve as much of our rural farming and green space as we can. So limiting the growth here really is a strategy to, conserve as much of our green and open space as we can. And so that's, a lot of people are concerned about the pace of growth and a large swath of our land with this recommendation, and even probably very closely to what we're doing today, this area is going to remain relatively untouched. 25 units a year is not a lot to allow in this particular, in all of these different zones.
What's the green there? Is that marsh? Wetlands?
This is just
The
RF.
dark green.
Resource.
That's
protection.
resource protection.
It's
Yeah.
essentially undevelopable.
And so for this iteration, we included these other zoning districts because I think we heard from the existing neighborhoods that we really wanted to protect those as well, right? And so it just took it one step further, I think, from the comp plan side.
Thank you.
All right, so is this you? Here's me. I can keep going. So again, this kind of shows, so if you guys recall, our current growth,
This is the new one.
yeah, our current growth was 301 from a townwide total perspective, plus some exemptions. So this is moving from 301 plus some exemptions to just 265 with no exemptions. And again, just recall that 224 is our current rate of, would be our current minimum under the definition we're kind of describing this. So this is really 45 units greater than what the state minimum would require. And this is totally, again, us just trying to put something out to get a reaction. Some of these areas we could go up, some we could go down. I think what I like about this model is it gives us that flexibility. But the concept that we need the council to hopefully get behind is this notion that, there's going to be an area 1 that has a certain amount of growth. There's going to be an area 2 that's going to have a certain amount of growth every 3 years, and an area 3 that's going to have a certain amount of growth every 3 years that we're essentially going to try and manage within to kind of stay to this annual average pace. So again, this just kind of summarizes and shows the comparison between the 301 and the new recommendation for 265 to show that we've done some reductions in the pace overall.
And John, it's the 224 is really our bottom. If we're doing the apples to apples comparison, 224 is the absolute minimum.
Yep.
And yeah, okay.
So again, these were the principles that were listed on the first slide. And again, we got so much feedback. And unfortunately, like, I'm glad we did it, but there's so many different perspectives out there. So we had to prioritize what we wanted to really prioritize for ourselves. And so really the principles were, is it giving a slower pace of growth? And that's coming from the feedback we've heard from the community. So at least as it stands, yes, under this approach, it does reduce our average pace going from the 301 to the 265. That number may not be enough for folks, but that's, you know, at least what this current proposal shows. Predictability, again, I think that's been the big piece of feedback for the residents, for the town, for the developers, is knowing what's really there and being consistent. Things like an exemption process reduce predictability. And this, we're saying there's no exemptions. This is it. This is the number. We're managing within that number. Protecting character of existing neighborhoods, you know, arguably, yes, especially in where we're doing the 25 units in area 1, you know, the high growth areas, I think, is where you would see, you know, more development that could change the character of those particular neighborhoods. Protect rural areas, yes. Conserve green space, yes, especially in those rural and residential areas today. There are a couple of things that we talked about that we wanted to try and address. And again, as we went through the process, and even as we talked to the committees, a lot of them were like, it's not, growth is okay as long as it's managed. And so the things that we need to do there, I don't think the GMO itself is the tool that's going to address it. It's really things like our impact fees. So a lot of people have concerns about our ability to absorb growth. So in order to address that, we need to act on other things like our impact fees to make sure new development is covering their fair share. You know, the school has come up as a concern, and we have a new school solution that's being debated by the public that we need to act on. You know, we have a townwide transportation plan that's in process that will address some of the issues with traffic. So not everything is going to be solved. That was the conclusion we had to eventually get to, is the GMO is not going to solve everything. So we have to like focus on the things we're trying to solve. You know, giving development flexibility in terms of their building cycle. So as Nick mentioned, you know, our planning process and our zoning doesn't align with our GMO today in terms of, you know, we say we want to allow multifamily in some areas, but the way we've, you know, limited the ability for permitting and having that annual view really makes it hard for developers to plan because their building cycle goes beyond that normal 12-month timeframe. You know, clear expectations to developers. I would say yes. I will say, you know, and the feedback that we've gotten in some of the items that are in the queue, like the Enterprise Business Park, that's 330 units. This solution would essentially turn that solution away. That type of development wouldn't work with this type of plan. So I think that's something we'll have to come to terms with, is that, you know, something we're comfortable with. Yeah.
That they design.
Yeah, so we would set the pace, and again, that's just too big of a project. I think that it wouldn't work within what we've described. Trying to remove politics from it and really just being clear that this is the process. Simplicity is important, so making sure not only is it simple for us, for the public, for the developers, but also for staff to administer. Again, an exemption process. We took the path of not having an exemption process altogether, and some of that was based on some feedback from the council. I will say, you know, we need to discuss that probably tonight, of, you know, there might be some things missing in here that could be better, that we may want to allow for exemption. But again, we need feedback to figure out if that's something that the council wants to continue to explore. And I mentioned easy administration by town staff.
John, yeah, just real quick, I also on the exemption idea, you might have been able to see some of the comments, but I would almost put it at a 50-50 split from the survey results we got back from what we did, of people saying we probably should have a process, and then others saying we don't. And it was almost right down the middle. So it was a coin flip. And you know, personally for me, I feel more comfortable without the exemption process. I think it will save this council a lot of time going forward. But again, John, Councilor Anderson is correct. We do need to spend some time discussing that aspect of it.
Yep. So again, I would say, if there are other key principles that aren't here that are important to you as counselors that we need to make sure we capture, so that we can take that into consideration when we make the final recommendation. I think we want to make sure we get some of that tonight.
So this may not be exactly what you're looking for in terms of a suggestion, but I'm having a hard time. Where can we identify the line of the rolling 10-year average here? Like, if, I've read through this very carefully. I think there are a lot of great recommendations, but is there any way on any one of these slides we can see what that line would look like? Say we just, went to that, what would it look like? The 144, or I guess it's 150 now, something like that. It changes year to year, rolling 10 years.
So that would be the best slide to probably look at that we could probably turn into a chart, a line chart would be this one.
Okay.
So this is showing right here, the line over the past 12 years.
Okay. And that would be the green bar there would be the equivalent of where we are versus the 144 or the one.
Yeah, well, this is not the 144. So
Okay.
again, we've changed the definition because remember in the past, our growth permits included fractionalization.
Yep.
So we tried to normalize that for like the true buildings, the true units that are out there. And so that's kind of our new reference point. We're moving beyond the old definition of a growth permit and saying, going forward, let's look at real growth. Let's look at the real total number of units. And that's how we get to the new number that we need to be thinking about. That would be our current 10-year average under this approach is the 224. So that would be, if you did the 10-year average for 2022 back to 2012, our new 10-year average for units is 224.
But that's sort of our Scarborough adjusted 144, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Mhm. All right, so Nick, you want to talk about pros and cons?
Sure. So the up to 207. The up to 275 units a year, it slows the pace of growth relative to a 5-year average. We've been averaging about 300 units a year for the last 5 years. It's about 8% slower. The proposal would be about 8% slower. And about 28% lower than our actual high of 380 units built. It allows for some predictability for school management, the town, the comprehensive plan. It is kind of in line with that as far as directing growth to our target areas. It's a simple approach. And I think the development community and the public know what to expect on a year-on-year basis. That I think is probably the big high points. The cons, we might see more growth over that 3-year period in a single year, right? So it's a pool that lasts for 3 years, basically, or a group of permits. So if a developer came in and wanted to put 200 of those 300 available permits in 1 year, that could happen, but the following 2 years, we should see that drop off dramatically. That could be viewed as a con. There's desirable projects might have to wait, or they might have to change the amount of time they plan to do business in Scarborough. I think Enterprise was a good example of that, which is would currently be too large under this proposal. However, if they adjusted their phasing opportunities, they might be able to make it work still. Excuse me. Potential limits on affordable housing, minimum 10% required. That is still in effect. The Downs has the 10% requirement. Let's see, no pathway if something extraordinary comes along, but could be handled as a one-off. So I think that is the miss on not having an exemption process is what is a potential opportunity down the road that we might miss out on. And that's a potential con.
One thing to add about the 224 average that's different from the way we've calculated in the past is that actually did include affordable housing in it. So that is inclusive of affordable housing would be our 10-year average. I'll just say personally, I do feel like the big con I feel like on this proposal is there is, a gap where I know there's a huge need for low income and middle income housing. This gets to it in theory by allowing more multifamily, but that could be market rate multifamily, which is not necessarily, providing choices for where we need like actually income restricted. So again, like I feel like that to me is one of the bigger cons of this proposal, that we've talked about some ideas, we haven't landed on what the solution is. And I think that's something we can talk about if you guys agree that this is, not good for affordable and workforce restricted housing.
Can I ask a quick question here? So have you given any thought to new residential construction figures, as a seasonally adjusted rate, they were 30%, 29.9% below the December 2021 rate. So are we giving any thought to that? I think directionally, it sounds like our things, we're adjusting, we're trying to make some accommodations for, for affordable and senior. However, 30% decline in housing starts seems like I know this is national figures, so we're
Mhm.
probably not,
I
not right in the middle of that. but-
Well, I think you're bringing forward the argument that really the developers were saying of why we shouldn't have a GMO at all, because if we were gonna let the market dictate our growth, then we wouldn't necessarily need a GMO. And so that's where we're saying our approach is we're gonna have a cap. That is our cap that we'll work within. Market forces can work within that cap. Some years it may be down 30%, some years it may be up 70%. So that's why we wanted to go with like a 3-year span
Sure.
that allows for market variability. But we still wanted to cap it and say, just because the market over that 3-year period maybe is a good 3 years for development, we're not ready as a community to go beyond that. And so we want to cap it at those numbers that we've proposed for every 3 years. So that is like the challenge that we're trying to blend in here, is that the market in some ways will dictate development. But it's our job to ensure that despite what's happening in the market, we're maximizing the general welfare for the general public. And so that's what we're trying to do by setting a cap and saying, depending on whatever happens in the market cycle, as long as we stay under a certain threshold, we think that's growth that the town can accommodate.
So my
Again-
only point here is that, you're working the high end of the curve, I'm working a lower curve. Is there data that suggests that should be, whatever we've arrived at could be lower based upon, what's happening with the economy? So, and I know we have other objectives
Yeah.
that don't align necessarily with
Mhm.
what's happening nationally, but.
I think that's good analysis, because one of the things we're gonna do with our final recommendation is put together a white paper. And I think having some sort of analysis looking at that, Karen, would kind of help just to make sure we're considering market dynamics and asking ourselves, how is this compared to that, at least in terms of, near-term projections or something, so that we can see how this is stacking up to support that. What we do know is that there's huge demand for housing in the state. So nationally, while of course might be a different number, I think at the state level, there's huge initiatives trying to drive for more affordable, low income housing choices for people. And so I think that's going to be a huge pressure, I think, for the council. And it may be even something that eventually gets out of our hands, because the state may act on that and may decide no GMO for certain types of development. Everybody has to open up their doors. Jean Marie, you look like you might want to comment on that.
Yeah, right now in Adjustment, there were a lot of build titles with nothing under them yet that they're working on. But there is a push, from two opposite ends of the aisle, for getting rid of GMOs,
Mhm.
in total. You've got the people who are the total free marketers, who are like, that you shouldn't be putting limits on housing at all. It's private property rights, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then you've got the other side saying, we need to have, we don't want GMOs because we need to have more housing, and by having more housing and by letting the market work, you can then provide more affordable housing and workforce housing.
Mhm.
So, and I would ask that the council, when we're talking about housing, to use the term workforce,
Mhm.
not just because I'm on this workforce housing, but it is a very specific niche in the market that gets at, those who are making 80 to 120 is a problem. I'm looking at Brian and whatever out there. I never remember the numbers. Oh, yeah, of which is not necessarily, it's not low income, it's workforce. And they can't afford to live here. They can't afford to live in this area. So we need to be very careful with what we're doing. And then Dawn was talking about, I don't know where you got those construction.
I sent it
numbers.
around. It's a link, we should-
I don't look at those links, but anyway, it doesn't matter. All real estate is local. Okay, that's major number one, which is fine. And construction is down because costs and whatnot are high right now and continue to be, even though supply chain has improved somewhat. You still have very high construction costs. Land costs are ridiculous.
Mhm.
As we found with looking for land for the school, there is no land. And so, it's basic market forces again, supply and demand. But if you look at your chart on historical permit numbers, I kind of chuckled when I looked at the years because they follow exactly what was going on in the real estate market. i.e., in 2010, we were just coming out of the 2008, 2009 crash of the market where, they were throwing money out the door to anybody who wanted a mortgage, and then that fell apart, and you had all the foreclosures and bankruptcies. Then you see the slow recovery. Then when you get into 2015 to 2017, and you start to see the engine pushing again. And you've also got to remember that these are somewhat lagging numbers. At least at some point, and Mr. Hall can correct me if I'm misremembering. But we were giving permits and people weren't necessarily shovel ready. Is that correct? So they were sitting on permits. So it was a lagging number for a while. And I know personally, I don't want us giving permits to anybody until they're shovel ready,
Mhm.
to be honest with you. But that's just something to decide. But we have to be very careful that what we do is not causing what we call exclusionary zoning,
Mhm.
which means that we don't want those people living in town. Because, it's not good for the economy. It's not good from society point of view.
Mhm.
And just, as someone who lives in the RF zone, I live, as people know, over on the other side of Westbrook, of Scarborough, near Westbrook. We do have some environmentally sensitive areas, so I'm glad to see us wanting to maintain, a slower rate of growth. It's not just, oh, well, it's those people over there, they don't have sewer and they don't have whatever, and that's why we're doing it. Well, no, you got water table issues, you've got,
Mhm.
all sorts of different things going on over there, so that's a good thing about this,
Mhm.
so. Anyway. I've
So-
talked long enough.
So I think with that, we're probably ready for discussion. And again, these are just some guiding questions for the counselors to consider on top of other specific things we want to ask you guys, but I'm just going to go through these just to kind of help with the discussion. So just looking for some immediate gut reactions, like what do you like? What gives you pause? What don't you like? What are we missing that you would like us to make sure we're considering as we go into this next round? So is there anybody who wants to kind of immediately? Karen?
I will say I have not been part of one conversation for the GMO, so maybe I'm asking questions that have been answered, but I did not see them answered tonight. One of the things that is current to me is I'm curious what's normal for support for towns for our size when it comes to police and fire and public works. I won't dive into the details of what I've heard recently. So I think if you want, I can go just the questions that come to mind, I
Yeah, go ahead.
guess. When we are issuing permits now, are there current developers or builders that we are issuing the permits to that are exempt from the impact fees? Now, if that's something that could be answered right now. So no matter what our GMO is part of those permits that we are issuing are people that we are issuing them to not paying impact fees.
Do you know the answer to that, Autumn?
If developers are not paying impact. fees?
Right, I don't know if there's some developers in certain parts of town who maybe aren't paying
Oh,
impact fees, or if everyone has. them.
Everyone has to pay them unless they have some sort of other credit enhancement agreement that would speak to those.
And
Now,
I think that the question is there, is this part of our consideration is, okay, we're gonna do this, but we're actually not gonna be getting impact fees back on every single permit that we issue? That's just a question.
Mhm.
What is the average pace of growth for towns our size? Are our impact fees similar to towns that are growing at this pace? I have some comments, but those are the questions that come
Okay,
to
go,
mind.
go with your comments. What are your comments?
Okay, sure. Well, so for anyone that doesn't know, I decided to run for town council because I did not feel like my needs were being met. So I was informed yesterday or this week that the fire department closest to my town, to where I live, is now not going to be functioning full time. So I do have concerns, and I will consistently say that I do not feel like the town is keeping up with the current rate of growth. I do not feel like we have been. And that's why I'm sitting here today, because for years I've been consistently saying my needs aren't being met. For example, you know, I have a daughter who's a teenager. I can't get her into the teen program. So now my teenager is sitting at home. My son plays basketball. Some of the basketball teams are now practicing in cafeterias. We're not keeping up with growth. We have a 6th grade that literally that is in a building that provides 0 special ed services. Directly impacted me, and that impacts every single child who is special ed that goes through our school system. I think we need to keep up with the pace. In 2020, the police served a protection order in 3 hours. In 2022, after 3 days, the resident had to call the police and say, why have you not served my protection order? I have concerns as a resident that I just don't feel like my needs are being met. I do not feel safe. And so I don't know how that computes into a GMO, but I represent everyone here who's saying kind of like, I want to pause and get you to where I feel like my needs are being met and I feel comfortable increasing the rate of growth.
Mhm. So just from the recommendation, I'm gonna say, from your perspective, this 265 average, you feel like is too high? Is
In
there-
my mind, because we are at 144 and we still have not brought our departments up to my mind to support the current residents that we have. As a current resident, I've lived here 17 years. Since I've had children specifically, I do not feel like this town has been able to keep up with the growth and meet my needs and the needs of.
All right, well, let's see for your questions. I think your first question on police, fire and public works, I think that, you know, Tom, I don't know if that's something you would want to address. I know when we did the survey, we surveyed the
Yeah, I think
departments.
What sticks with me is I met with Public Works and he said, we've added 56 miles of road in 1 employee. That stuck out at me. I was like, is that normal? I would imagine that she would want more in that department. I'm a new counselor. These are just the things that are being relayed to me that kind of struck me as like, you seem a little understaffed,
Mhm.
especially that department as well. My understanding is they have a lot of open positions. So we even, you know, we have departments that aren't even fully staffed to currently support the population that we currently
Yeah.
have.
And one thing I would just kind of say is partly why it's hard to staff is because those jobs need housing in order for them to be able to afford to live here. And that's a real issue. Like, I think in terms of, you know, the police shortage I read yesterday, it's a statewide problem where we have a police shortage. That's just a reality. And it's really hard to recruit and get police officers on board in the state. And I think, again, housing is part of that solution. It's not the only solution, but it's like, you know, if we don't have the housing that they can live in, they're not going to come to our community and work here. Last year during the budget process, the police chief put forward, I think, 3 FTE initially. And then in the end, he said, you know what? As much as I need the 3, I can only get 2. So I'm going to ask for 2. And that's like, that has nothing to do with growth. That has to do with the fact that we can't hire the people. And so I think there's a bigger solution there probably that we need to work through as a community. So I just wanted to share that perspective. Impact fees, I think we answered. Yeah. Anybody want to go next in terms of what they thought, immediate reactions, like dislike? Counselor Cucci?
Sure. So I like the using the maps and splitting the town into 3 different zones. I'm on board with zone 1 or area 1. I think that makes a lot of sense. I'm I'm loosely on board with area 3. My hesitation there is that the zoning is very flexible. And sometimes you need incentive to put out the best quality product that you can. I feel like this may be just like, hey, give us 150 units a year without enough. There might be some other tweaks that need to happen to try to encourage quality.
Do you mind if I ask, like, what are some things you would suggest in terms of tweaks to drive quality?
I don't have a suggestion.
Okay.
The example I guess that I'll lean on is, the exemption process occupied most of last year. As painful as that was, when they came asking for the initial exemption, they didn't have a plan. They
Mhm,
didn't have an architect. So as a result of that process, they hired Cube 3 and they've
Mhm.
done a lot of work to
mhm.
create a vision for the downtown there. And now we're at a proof of concept day. So I want to see that continue in the execution. My hesitation is that we just say, you're going to get 2,000 no matter what. Maybe it shifts the dynamic a little bit.
We've talked about that a little bit in terms of what do we need to change in the zoning to better ensure
Mhm.
quality, which could be one element. But even I think in the exemption, as we write up this 450, we could also qualify that a little bit too, where kind of like what we did in the last exemption, where some of it was for mixed use building for multifamily. We can get more specific probably for this first round of the 450 to try and drive it towards
And
very
we have a
specific.
check-in with them every year, so it could be.
Yeah.
There's ways to manage that, I guess.
Mhm.
The area 2. I like the concept. I like the spreading it over 3 years. What my gut tells me is gonna happen without additional constraints is that you're gonna have enterprise come in and steal 300 permits and nobody's gonna be able to build. And then the council's gonna be in a position where, oh geez, my niece just bought a lot, spent her life savings, she can't build for 4 years.
Mhm.
Which is kind of the situation we're in before. So there's gonna, I think, need to be some safeguards in place where to help guard against that happening. I'm on board with the concept. So I see the GMO having 2 primary purposes. One is to help you avoid overwhelming your resources and your capacity. And I'm more of a data guy. There's very few like points of data that you can look at that demonstrates that current pace of growth is overwhelming our resources. That's just, and I've looked pretty hard. There's perceptions that what's that? Yeah.
That we just feel.
Yeah, absolutely. But the other main goal or reason for the GMO is to help you achieve your comp plan.
Mhm.
And when we talk about things like affordable housing and workforce housing, I'm not sure that we're quite hitting it with this. I think in terms of our conservation areas, we are. I think this is, I think it's there. So it's just something to think about as.
Yeah. Can I follow up with the affordable housing thing with a idea just to
Yeah.
gauge reaction would be, because again, this is what we've been talking about is, what if there was an exemption process that was only for deed restricted affordable and workforce housing, where those still came before the council would view those similar to our contract zone process where we tell them to proceed or not. And really that would be supported by town staff to kind of guide us and say, we think this doesn't impact our ability to absorb the growth. So that was one thing we've talked about that we
I
didn't
mean,
put in
outside
here.
of these so-called numbers, I mean,
Yeah.
I would like to see that.
So I think what would probably happen, and the contract zones aren't going away either, is most affordable housing developments need to come to the council anyways. I suspect that we would tag that, like, this is exempt, whether it's part of this GMO or not, they would probably get
Mhm.
some allowance to build, with the exception of the downs, where those don't typically come before the council. They are required to do them.
Mhm. And again, that I think that your point about the 100 or the 300 in the area 2, I think that that's been part of our conversation is like, and it goes back to the con of there might be a project that we want, or there might be something, but also the scenario of if they eat all of the permits by year 2 and somebody else has to wait, like, we could either just say, sorry, you gotta wait, or, with our planning director, we can kind of tell her like, hey, 300 apartment project is not something the town can absorb. So when people come to Autumn, that's kind of our first pass to be able to say, this isn't really gonna work within the community, given our approach.
Yeah, one of the things conditions you had in there was no more than 20% 3-bedroom or larger. You might hold out 20% for 3-bedroom or larger.
Like reserve it for,
To avoid the situation that we've had in the past.
Counselor Scyther?
So my initial reactions are similar to Counselor Clucci's, so I won't repeat some of the things that he said, but one of the things that gives me a little bit of hesitation is this concept of kind of planning what future councils are going to be acting on. And so we might have the best of intentions to say X number of permits over 3 years. In my 3rd year on the council, I grant a project for 300 units and then I'm off the council. There's nothing stopping 7 new people from coming in and saying, I love this brand new 300 unit project that's coming before us and grant projects and we can't forecast or dictate what future councils do. And so I'm a little nervous or apprehensive to at the idea that and that being said, a future council could come in and say, well, I don't like the 165 and we're gonna, or 265 and I'm gonna make it 500 and that could happen too. But there is this idea that if we grant a large project in the early years, that the longevity of the council and then whatever it happens between that and the next big project isn't really our say necessarily. And so that gives me a little bit of hesitation. And then right now in ordinance, we just had the hotel conversion conversation. And so I do think that that is something that needs to be discussed as we talk about GMO planning, because some of those hotel conversions, I mean, it was, 75 units or 200 units, depending on how big the hotel was. And so a project like that, that would incentivize workforce housing or, that we could kind of set the specific type of housing we wanted, might be something that's really appealing to us, but that's a lot of permits up front for a singular project. And so with a GMO that restricts something like that, there were multiple hotels on that list that if hotel conversion is something that we want to talk about as a council, we're limiting ourselves before we even really have the discussion in earnest.
Well, that's why John was talking about the exemption.
Right. And when it comes to an exemption process, I know how much time the exemption process took us. It does. I'm probably more of the camp that we do need to have some kind of exemption process, but I also am leery that, it's just going to be a application after application after application, and we're just going to be right where we are now, deciding on an individual basis whether we're going to give out 100 permits at a time in addition to what we've already given out. That, at least to me as a counselor, makes me feel like I'm in control, as opposed to not having an exemption process and then granting 300 permits over 3 years, because as soon as I'm not sitting in this chair, I've given up my decision making. And so at least I feel like with an exemption process, I can still say no or yes if it's a good project.
Okay. Great.
I just wanted to clarify that every 3-year period was put in place because you have to renegotiate, if you will, the GMO every 3 years. So that's
Okay.
where we got that number from. It has to come back before this council or whoever's in the seat to look at it again every 3 years. And the state statute requires that you do the 5%
Right.
increase over what's been actually granted.
Yeah.
So I did want to let you know that's why we picked that. And I also wanted to point out, as far as like the hotel motel conversion, you do have the ability to exempt things outside of the GMO process, right? So you can set this framework up and it's very clear and concise, but if another really interesting ordinance comes to you, say the hotel motel, and you take a look at it, you can exempt those units from the GMO within that body. Like you could exempt the CPD zone from the GMO if you so wished within that zoning. So you can take, you don't always have to visit it under this GMO. So you can deal with it in other ways. I just wanted to point that out. Might be a way to do it.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, I think Counselor Scyther, you summed up exactly the same challenge Nick and I have been having with this whole process is like, there's no perfect solution, nor will this body create one, nor will the next one create one. So I think it's really important that we just kind of find a path that we think is checking as many boxes as we can. And at least for this, the body that's here, try and stick to it and try and be consistent. And again, I think really the hope is like we create a GMO that there's enough rationale and justification behind that council can let it ride for 3 years, come back and like review it. That might be the time to say, you know what, 300 is too low given where we are. We've addressed our police challenge. We have the capacity, let's grow. Or it might be the opposite where it's like, no, we need to really pull back. And this at least gives us some levers to play around with to say, where do we want to target that pullback? Is it an area 2? Is it an area 3? Is it an area 1? Just to try and like give us some choices or give the council choices of, you know, we have options of where we can pull back. This one is really saying, you know, really pull back in area 1, like a little bit of a throttle in area 2 and a little bit more of a full throttle in area 3 is kind of the suggestion here. What those numbers are, I think is very debatable of like what the throttle actually is.
Sure. Yeah, so if I'll just finish up by saying, you know, I think just having some predictability for developers is an overarching goal of mine because we didn't want developers to have to come to us repeatedly with requests. So certainly predictability for developers is a goal of mine, but then also accountability for us as a body is important to me too. And so I don't want to have something that, you know, we can just repeatedly roll over because that doesn't give the community the predictability that they're looking for.
And that was kind of the argument of to try and not have an exemption
Yeah.
process, because the exemption process itself is an owl. Yeah. And so trying to say, we're not gonna have an exemption process, we're gonna grow at a pace. Everybody knows those are the rules. If you want to develop in Scarborough, as long as you're working within our ordinance, come and develop in Scarborough.
Councilor Anderson, I think one of the things that you also said in our group was if there is going to be something like an exemption process, that it be very prescriptive. So there's not so much subjectivity in it. And it's almost like a checklist. And planning staff can do a lot of that background work so that it's not before the council for months on end. And that's something that you very much wanted to do.
One of the things we talked about, which is kind of flipping the exemption process through a slightly different lens, is it's less about defining public benefit and more about assessing the community's ability to adequately absorb that project. So again, to Karen's point, if a 500 unit project came that was fantastic in a picture, but we go through town staff, not just planning, but all the departments and say in the school and say, hey, a 500 bedroom apartment, give us your assessment of, can you absorb what we would predict would happen there? And the council would get, you know, hopefully a qualified opinion from town staff and potentially committees that says, this is good, we're not worried. We would suggest to the council that you consider this, or it could be, no, this is too much. We don't want to, we wouldn't move that forward and the council can vote it up or down. So again, that was a different view where we're moving away from public benefit because that is such a subjective thing to really say more of an analytic around, can the town adequately absorb this project? So go ahead.
I just want to kind of maybe ask the council to consider this. So when I was thinking about the exemption process, right? I started asking myself, well, what type of project would I see come through that would make me want to be like, yes, this is totally different and great. And I'm trying to think of the projects in my head that are going to be different than what we're already building out at the CPD or any of these other targeted growth areas. Is it going to be more apartments, more condos, or more single family homes? Pretty good. And so for me, I was like, what is that project look like? Why would it not be able to work within the 265, 275? So I guess for me, for the council, what I'm asking you is put yourself in those shoes. Like, what's the project you would see that would be like, yeah, that's worth bending the rules for? That, because that's what an exemption really is. So I would love to hear your answers on that. And then two, also on the affordable / workforce housing front, we have been growing, the 6-year average here was about 50 units a year. We have about 300 affordable housing units that have been built in town over the last 6 years. So I guess my question then that I would ask all councilors to ask themselves is, what is the right amount? Like, is that too slow? Is it not enough? Like, because I think that also plays into how you view the exemption process, because from what I've gathered from feedback and surveys is, well, the exemption would probably be used in an affordable setting or workforce housing aspect. So if 50 a year is not enough for you, what is the number you're really looking for? That would cause you to say, yeah, we need an exemption for that. That's just food for thought. That's
Yeah.
stuff I would love to hear you think about and respond, so we can kind of try to figure that into the next go around.
Counselor Katarina?
I just jotted down just a few things because you were presenting. One is, this is an iconoclastic thought. Why do we even have a GMO? Why don't we just fix our zoning and leave it at that? So there you go. Deed restrictions, I know you noted, deed restrictions. I know from my work in real estate, deed restrictions are notoriously difficult to construct and then keep them going over time.
Mhm.
So I want more information from real estate attorney types to give us more info on something that's a little more ironclad. Just an example, the town of Yarmouth had an affordable housing. This was back around 2000, maybe 2002 was when I first got into real estate, which was really cool. They had these nice, they supposedly had these deed restrictions, but guess what? They found ways around them and boom, they're no longer affordable and haven't been for a number of years. So it's just something to keep an eye on. Impact fees. Developers obviously don't like them. The real estate community, not me, but Maine Association of Realtor types, they don't like them. In part because they add to the cost of building. So that is something you've got to weigh.
Mhm.
And I know that the state is pretty strict on what you can and can't do with impact fees, and I think we're a little out of whatever at the moment, but I don't wanna just look at autonomous. So that's just something we need to make sure we're looking at. And be really careful, please, when you use words like the character of neighborhoods. That's all.
Mhm.
That's all I'm gonna say.
Yeah.
I've already gotten in
Sure.
trouble with that, but
Yep.
I'm gonna stay on that.
Mhm.
So that's it. That's all my immediate thoughts are.
All right. Counselor Hamel?
Yeah, I thought, in large part, the work, was very good, very comprehensive. You looked at everything. You did a nice job of, factoring in quantitative and qualitative issues. And you hit most of the areas of concern and analysis. So I mean, I like what you're doing. You're flattening the curve. It's simpler. Your effort to take away exemptions, even though we all always know there's going to be an exception or an exemption. I think you've done really good work on that. The big question I have is though, when are we fully built? Okay, so I keep going back to quoting Joe Cotera, our bond guy, who says you got 24% of your remaining land that's developable. So I'm assuming we'll just be going up at that point in time, in terms of height restrictions. So when do we say, no more room here? I mean, I know that, they say we're a nation of immigrants, but the main version of that would be we're all from away, right? Nobody, unless you're from First
Excuse me.
Nation, unless you're descended from First Nation people. We all came here from someplace. So
Mhm.
when do we, when do we start talking about those terms? And, we have, we're not even at the 10-year mark on a 30-year commitment for one developer that has 50% of the units that we're committing to, or 52% by my math on the recommendation here. So, those are some of the questions that I have that I know we will answer over time. We don't have an answer for them now, but those are my concerns. And several people have mentioned, what about the, you know, the desirable developments, you know, which is there, you know, what's the next Amazon, you know, proposal like that, or the next, I'll use as an example, one that was recognized as very worthy of a contract zone amendment. And that was the second phase of Piper Shores, you know, our largest taxpayer in town. You know, there will be things like that that we still have to make exceptions for. I know we still have the contract zone process, but so you know, and I would say the enterprise thing, I mean, I know it's 300 units, but we had another builder who somehow got around that by just extending the time frame. I understand the investors in the enterprise development, you know, we're not willing to do that, but I mean, here you have a developer, high quality, the stuff they've done so far looks great. Their storage spaces look better than, you know, some of our construction. So, you know, are we forfeiting an opportunity like that for something that would, you know, represent a, you know, very high quality type of development? So anyway, those are my random rambling thoughts. Thank you.
Right. Any other feedback or thoughts from the council, Councilor Pucci?
So the only other thing that I like this chart. I think one of the key concepts that I'm grappling with is what happens with no council action. So maybe put a column, what happens under the current GMO if there's no council decision to change something? That was really the dynamic that we consciously changed with the last GMO, was we want accountability. So people are going to yell at us when we decide to allow growth. There's a lot of downsides that come with that. There's some pluses that come with it too. So that's, you know, for me, that's what I'm trying to wrestle with. Are we compensating with, you know, just kind of setting it and forgetting it? Do we have the right controls and meters in place to allow that to happen? We have Autumn here now, so take her closer.
Yeah.
I will say that this whole process, and I did the surveys with a lot of the groups, and I think it was really, really beneficial because it gave those groups, even if they weren't focused on growth or the GMO numbers, it really brought their issues and their topics for discussion. And I think it was just an amazing opportunity to see full picture what the town is missing but looking for and wants to be. And so I think my goal, you know, as a planning director for this is, let's get this squared away and then get busy on all of these other ordinances, because I think Councilor Katarina can probably speak to this. We may not have this GMO opportunity around for a long time, but we will have our other ordinances in place. And I think that's what's really exciting about this, getting it to a point where we can check this box, we feel okay with it, and then we can move on to fix all of these other things that were identified through this process. I think that's really the positive spin on this whole thing.
Yeah, that's what convinced me to the set it and forget it piece, was like learning from Autumn. Like, we're so lucky to have Autumn as our new planning director. Like, I wish everybody was in our meeting so you could get the benefit of her expertise. And every time she has a great idea, I'm like, oh, we should do that instead, or can we do that? But I'm like, no, this is about the GMO. And so, you know, the more we can get something here that we can hopefully let it ride for a little bit so that we can focus on those other things, even if it's just a near-term thing, I think that's going to actually manage growth much better than this particular ordinance and what we're recommending tonight. And so, but we need this, and we need to move on from this, and we need something we can support and hopefully get behind, so that way we can actually focus on those other things. Because what I don't want is another action next year for 2 more counselors to look at the GMO. So I really hope we can find something that we're comfortable with. It may not be, again, it's not going to be perfect, but at least it's good enough to like let it ride for a little bit so that we can focus on some other things, like understanding our impact fees better and making sure we address those. So I just want to summarize the feedback I heard, and if oh, go ahead.
I wanted to know if it was worthwhile to get the pulse of whether or not, I mean, the numbers are important, whether or not the current proposed numbers are maybe about right, too high, too low. Just a general temperature from counselors, just so when we go back to the drawing board, along with community feedback, we kind of at least have some understanding of what some of the counselors think with this proposal. I don't know if
It's like
you
the
wanna risk
Goldilocks,
that.
too high, too low, just right.
Yeah.
So let's go down the
About right.
line. Yeah. maybe starting with you, Counselor Hamel,
Directionally good, still too high.
okay? Katerina,
I don't have an opinion at the moment. Other than I do think we need to have, I'd rather concentrate on a ceiling than a floor.
Mhm.
You know, so.
Good song.
okay,
Song.
Counselor Shoup,
Too high.
all right? Counselor Scyther,
Uh, probably more comfortable than people who have spoken before me. In terms of, I think we're getting to numbers that I could be comfortable with. My concern still just continues to be, if we're granting big chunks, is that really, are those big chunk, like, it's easier to wrap my head around the smaller number than it is to wrap my head around the impacts of those bigger chunks. And so if we're gonna be talking about it in terms of delivering them in bigger chunks, is that something that I am comfortable with? That's,
Okay.
I'm still thinking about that.
okay? Sorry, Counselor Cluche, I skipped you.
I didn't notice.
Sorry, I was trying to go down the line, but
I don't really have a Goldilocks sense for this. Again,
Mhm.
to me, this is a tool to help you achieve your comp plan, and 265, 275 single family homes is way too many. 50 to 60 single family homes with some mixed use developments in there that add up to 275 is probably okay. I don't know that we'll honestly sustain that for all that long. But
Counselor McGee, what do you think?
Well, if I had my wand, a little lower wouldn't hurt. That'd be my take on it.
All right, I'm not Goldilocks, is that her? Yeah. I found just right. Like, I feel like I'm comfortable with this because I think I've been so close to it. I've learned to see the pros and cons to say this is something I think the town can manage to and hopefully enables it. What I'm hearing that will kind of hopefully get this to the next level is we still kind of got to answer council action, to your point of like, do we allow, both of you were kind of the most vocal on this, do we allow an exemption? How do we have accountability with the council? Is that something we need to kind of further debate and come forward with a recommendation? I'm gonna say we need to better qualify those bigger numbers probably to make sure we're where we can trying to drive to quality, at least through this ordinance. But again, I think the zoning might be another opportunity down the road. I still feel like affordable housing and workforce, while I think it's baked into the estimates, it still needs probably some more thought of like, how do we make sure, Jean Marie, to your point, we're not,
Right.
creating a different problem for ourselves and making sure we're addressing. it.
Right, and I see the development of workforce housing in particular as an economic development issue.
Mhm.
I
And
mean, that to me is like,
Mhm.
it's becoming critical. It's beyond critical.
And I think
For a lot
for
of people.
Counselor Shoup, what I heard is whatever we put forward, we need to, and the strategy is putting together a white paper where we really want to be clear that if we continue to grow at this rate, some of the specific examples that you shared, like how are we confident that this is gonna be something that will mitigate that experience for the public? Again, it won't, everybody's gonna have different experiences in the public. We can't control what happens, but in general, can we justify, we feel like our police can absorb this, our schools can absorb this, our services will continue to be quality. So again, I think that's the analytic we're working on behind the scenes to make sure we can justify that this pace will hopefully be something that maintains the quality of the services, or in some ways tries to close that gap that you said that you're experiencing and brought up. And did I miss anything in summary that would be important that Nick and I continue to address? And again, if you guys have ideas of things that you'd like to see, we don't have all the ideas, so always like feel free to send us ideas and notes, or if you want to join one of our Tiger Team meetings to get a closer. Yes, I don't, that's what, yeah, that's what I started calling it, our Tiger Team. Counselor Clucci.
So I just wanted to add that So I don't care so much about the town council exemptions right now. I think the primary reason we had that in there was for the downs because they were not a contract zone. They needed some path forward that we knew the GMO was not going to count for. I think you solved that. Where I do think some exemptions may still be relevant though is, for workforce housing and affordable, or replacement unit, some of the things that have been in there for a long, long time. I don't have a problem keeping them as exempt from this particular piece of the ordinance. I think it's cleaner to keep your exemptions here than try to bury them in other parts of the zoning. I know that it can be done both ways. But
Mhm.
I just wanted to offer too, that you may create the council exemption process. We've sort of talked about it and it sounds like we'll probably end up with, but you could perhaps even lower the total townwide unit number. But your concern, Counselor Souther, about like the larger projects, maybe require a project with over 100 units, maybe that's not the number, has to get council action through an exemption process. And then it gets vetted through the town staff and through the different committees and boards, and then it comes to you all. And maybe that takes away your concern, because it's the big ones I see that feels like, oh, okay, we're gonna have 300 and we're just gonna have one project for 3 years. And are we really comfortable with that? And maybe that is, we can create an exemption process just for those larger. And then maybe address affordable and workforce in a different way, but we could lower the townwide
Mhm.
total units to accommodate those. So it would still sort of even out and not feel like we're growing too fast and doing too much, but we would have that flexibility in,
Mhm.
just an idea.
I think next question is an important one for us to think about is like, what would we want to exempt? Like, what is the type of
Great.
project? Like, would we want to exempt a 300 unit project? Personally, my answer to that would be no, but what I would want to exempt is a really good affordable housing project that comes forward if it can't be in this process because all the permits are gone and, we want to help that affordable project. But again, I would want to at least see it. That doesn't mean I would vote yes on it, but I would want to at least not tell it no personally.
I don't want to shut it out.
Yeah.
The numbers, the permit numbers, just because.
Mhm. All right, anybody else have any other feedback? We have 8 minutes before the town council meeting. What I'm gonna suggest is we'll probably take a break and then we have general public comment on the agenda. So if anybody here wants to comment on the workshop and what we did here, when we go into general public comment for our regular agenda, that's the opportunity for you to come up if you wanted to talk about back on the proposal or any questions you might have. So unless there's any other comments that anybody wants to share, I really just before we break, really want to thank Karen, Autumn, and Tom for their support on this. I feel like true to the order that we put together that gave Nick and I the authority to move this forward. Tom has really made town staff very available to Nick and I to work on this. So I really appreciate the partnership, the availability, the time that both of you guys and Tom have put into this. Because again, as I said, having Autumn here, we are very lucky as a community. I think she's going to be an excellent planning director. And again, her ideas have been super helpful in kind of advancing our thoughts here. So thank you, Autumn. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Tom. And with that, we'll go to break and come back at 7 o'clock.
What's that?
All right, today is February 15th. This is our regularly scheduled town council meeting. I'm calling this meeting to order. Second item is Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Right. Next item is roll call. Liam, do you mind taking the roll, please?
Sure. Counselor Seither,
Here.
Counselor Clucci. Here. Counselor Shute,
Here.
Counselor Katarina,
Here,
Counselor Hamel. Here. Counselor McGee,
Here.
Chairman Anderson.
Here. Next item is general public comment. If there's an item not currently on the agenda that you would like to comment on, if you could come up to the podium or raise your hand online. If you could just please state your name and address for the record.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Peter Hayes, 5 Indian Hill Lane. And I'm here to talk tonight. Some of you may remember I was here last fall as we were having the discussion about the library expansion. And I expressed a real concern that we were not in compliance with a lot of our standing fiscal policies, and further expressed that given the magnitude of what we've got facing us in capital expenditures, a new school, a community center, a library, that is going to be critically important that we're in compliance with a fiscal policy because it can very much affect the bond ratings we're going to get. So I expressed that concern and really stressed we really should be focusing on how can we get our financial house in order. So with that, I watched the finance committee last week, and I'd like to kind of recap. And at the 109-minute mark, there was a conversation, a very brief conversation regarding the status of the unassigned fund balance. I encourage all of those in the audience, and even here, if you haven't heard, to go back and listen to that exchange. It's very enlightening and concerning. Our physical policy states that the goal is to maintain a level of unassigned fund balance of equal to 10% of the town's operating budget for the past fiscal year and not to fall below 8.3%. So then at the 110 mark, the council chair, the finance committee chair asked a question and had an observation and said, when I pulled the annual statement and did the calculation, I came up with 2.36%. So remember, the policy says a minimum of 8.3. His calculation was 2.36% based on June 30th, 2021 data. That's the most recent data that was available at the time. That's concerning. We need to know where we are financially. He goes on to say that's a combination of what's in our general fund, which I think was what we're used to seeing, and that's somewhere around 6.9%. So remember the 8.3%? Either number you look at, we are not in compliance with our own fiscal policy. And he goes on to say, but then there's a couple of other funds that actually have negative unassigned fund balance, which is why you go from the 6.9 to the 2.3. The town's response, which comes about the 112 mark, is we do have a policy, and that's a self-imposed policy. There is nothing in writing that requires us by any federal or other agencies that what percentage of fund balance we need to keep. And I would argue there is something in writing. It's our fiscal policy. That is in lieu of federal law or state law or others. That's the town council's policy. So I just stress that. But he goes on to say, but what's certainly true is that once we have a policy, we need to respect and honor it. And I can assure you that the bond rating agencies are very interested in, first, if you have a policy, and two, if you are compliant with your own policies. I mean, that's pretty telling. It goes on to say, beyond that, certain rating agencies, Moody's in particular, as a standard of their business, highly values fund balance. Moody's in particular does, Standard & Poor's not so much. And so to the extent that fund balances and adherence compliance with policies matter in terms of what our bond rating is, that can actually translate into real dollars. I mean, we're talking a couple change in decimal points is hundreds of millions, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. So I just have a request to the town council. we all need, we, the public, and I suspect you, we all need to know what is our current numbers today. Those numbers should be available. We should be able to look at those and we should be able to interpret those. And I would also suggest it should become a town council's top priority to make sure before we go to market for the bonds we got approaching, we are in compliant with our policies. So I would also suggest that as you think about the budget, if we need to get our fund balance within compliance with our policy, there may need to be an appropriation this year in the fund balance, in the budget, to get money into the fund balance so we're compliant. The other request I'd have is at our next town council meeting, that the town staff does a presentation of all the numbers, so all of you and all of us can see which policies we're in compliance with and which policies we're not, and maybe have some action plans on how we can become in compliance by the time we have to go to the bond market. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hayes. Is there anybody on the council who would like to respond to the comment?
I just want to thank Peter for his comments. As a new member of the Finance Committee, I think he expressed a lot of the concerns that came to my mind after I processed how that meeting went out. So thank you, Peter.
All right. And is there anybody else in the public who would like to comment on anything not on the agenda tonight? All right, I'm seeing nobody in the room and nobody raising their hand online. So with that, I'm closing general public comment. Next item is item 5 minutes from our February 1st, 2023 town council meeting. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor? All right, it's unanimous. Next item is adjustment to the agenda. I would like to suggest one adjustment to the agenda where we move item 10, standing and special committee reports and liaison reports, to follow the town manager report meeting. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? All those in favor? All right, it's unanimous. All right, next up is item number 7, items to be signed, a treasurer's warrant. I signed those right before the meeting. Next is item 8, town manager report. Tom?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have a number of things to report on this evening. I want to start with one perhaps light thing, but very important. Today is School Resource Officer Day, and there's probably a week for everything, but I really want to just take a moment and just pause and recognize really the tremendous work our school resource officers do. Thankfully, the council and past councils have supported that program very well. We have 3 full-time SROs. In the off season, if you will, out of the school hours. There are other duties that are assigned, but they do a tremendous work. They are the ever-present face of law enforcement. But more importantly, I think they bond, with the students and make really good, in some cases, lifelong relationships. So currently, Rob Pellerin, Eric Greenleaf, and Mike Beeler are our current SROs. I should also mention Frank Plord was at the high school for 20 years. Just last year, he was promoted to a sergeant, so he's now in the patrol ranks. But Frank, has touched a lot of people, a lot of kids throughout all of his years, and they really do a tremendous job, and they're a great bridge to our youth. So I want to acknowledge them. As part of the annual goal process, the council's established its goals. In turn, I've established my own in coordination with council leadership. We've signed off on those just last week. One of those goals is for me to report in this setting on a consistent basis, I think monthly basis, what kind of progress myself and staff are making to help you achieve your goals. So I did have a chance to have a fairly thorough review of the council's goals with my staff last week. And I intend to follow up with a couple of key members, giving some of the specific goals of the council. And in turn, many of my staff who provide support to various committees are just now reviewing various goals with committees, which I think we all expect is those folks are going to help us do a fair amount of that work. So I'm not in a position to report this evening, but I do intend as soon as the March meeting to be in a regular cadence of providing those reports to you. I also want to speak to the issue that raised a couple of weeks ago with respect to inconsistencies with our zoning map. I've been remiss somewhat in providing a written report to council. I will with a proposal But we've been using the last couple of weeks to do our own research to really understand and assess kind of the depth and the breadth of the issue to the extent it exists. In the course of that, we've chosen to go back to 2002, so over 20 years look back. And really what's important about that, one, I think is a significant amount of time, but it also represents the time that we've become, hosted a digital zoning map. Prior to that, it was done through traditional paper map methods, which we have copies downstairs. So from our perspective, that was a good, reasonable look back. That was a thorough search of all the official meeting minutes. So we have a good understanding of what past councils have done. Just to recap, there have been a total of 53 different zone changes over the course of those 20+ years. We have identified 8 instances where there are inconsistencies. In some cases, they're outright misses. And in other cases, there's a slight inconsistency in terms of a line being slightly different. At this point, we've not done any changes. And I want to certainly provide some detailed information to the full council and perhaps take it up with leadership in terms of how we go forward. I will say that we did have an opportunity with the ordinance committee last week to share some ideas about codifying a process that will ensure that this doesn't happen going forward. The other thing that gives me some comfort, and hopefully you, of those 8 instances, in many cases, they were requests by the actual property owner. And so in no case, based on our review so far, is any of the current use on those properties inconsistent with the current zoning change, if you will. So that's not to dismiss the oversight. It's something that we need to acknowledge, and it's frankly unacceptable. And we need to ensure that we have good systems in place going forward. Again, I'm just comforted that there's been no, apparently no impact of that other than that inconsistency. So to the council, I will be providing written proposal and look for council leadership as to how we want to move this forward. With respect to the Comfort Inn, I think the council's aware that we expected that there was be some issues not issues, but guests lingering into February. Sure enough, that's the case. As of today, there's 20 remaining individuals. I believe they're all individuals in this case. At this time, there's no families. I've been advised by the attorney representing the hotel that February 23rd will be the hearings related to those 20 remaining guests. I'm very pleased to report that calls of service have gone down considerably. In fact, we've only had one so far in February. So it's very manageable from that point of view, but I think we all want to get to a different place, which is to get that back in service for what it was always designed for. I've made leadership aware, but I want to make the rest of council and certainly the public. The Scarborough Land Trust has approached the town regarding 4 town-owned properties. There's 3 of them that are share a boundary, if you will, smaller lots on Muzzy Road, and then a 4th property down right on the Nonsuch River on Route 1, next to the old Humpty Dumpty building, if you will. In all cases, Land Trust owns property all around these town-owned properties, and they've expressed interest in having them be part of their holdings for conservation purposes. I bring that up because the council does have a disposition policy, which requires the input of a lot of senior staff members and a lot of various committees. It's very clear in that regard. So I'm in the process of soliciting that input. And when I have it to the point, and I'm probably 75% of the way through that process, I will be advancing it again after a consult with council leadership in front of the council for your consideration. Also thinking about Scarborough Land Trust, I believe I've mentioned in passing, they continue to express interest in being a tenant, probably the tenant at Aldra Hall. We continue to have a space that we don't have any program use for. I've always been intrigued with them, given our relationship and our long-term historical connection, and I expect a long-term future connection. They're really trying to understand what sort of improvements need to be made to make it suitable and code compliant. So we're going through that process. I hope to have more to report in the next several months. Lastly, 2 things. I should mention, and for members of council that have had the opportunity to serve on the EcoMaine Board of Directors. EcoMaine does a great thing for its member communities. They do an Eco Excellence Award. It's really driven by each community. This year, staff has recommended Noah Perlet to receive that award. And Noah, for those of you who aren't familiar with his accomplishments, it really embodies, I think, everything that Eco Excellence would suggest. He continues to amaze in terms of his support of various town committees and just steadfast advocacy for conservation and preservation of natural resources. So we're very pleased that Noah will be receiving that this year. And lastly, perhaps on a low note, tax bills, second half tax bills will be sent out tomorrow. So dare I predict how the U.S. Postal Service will deliver the mail. They could be in mailboxes as soon as Friday, but I wouldn't necessarily count on that at this point. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'm available for questions.
All right, are there any questions for Tom? Counselor Cucci?
So just, thank you for the update on the zoning map. So right now, what we're using as our like authority for the zoning map is what's published online? Is that-
Yes,
Okay, and we're not changing that. We're doing a research to understand what changes may need to happen.
correct.
That's
Correct.
helpful.
Yeah, part of what I want to propose to council is really how do we establish that kind of fresh starting point, and then also from this point forward, or a point forward, what is the process we're going to do, put in place to manage these sorts of changes that will inevitably happen over time.
Thank you.
Counselor Shoup?
Sure. Yeah, I actually took a tour of the Scarborough Historical Society Museum this past weekend, and the Alger Hall, am I saying it correctly, came up, and they were asking me what was going on with it. And they were expressing interest in expanding into it as well. So when you said that Scarborough Land Trust was interested in, it, I just found it interesting as well that they'd expressed it to me, but it doesn't sound like it's made it anywhere
No.
besides me. But I appreciate kind of knowing what's going on there. Thank you.
Any other questions for Tom? All right, thank you, Tom. Next up is item 10, which is standing and special committee reports and liaison reports. So one of the discussions that we've been having is when we have really good discussions that are happening at the town committee level. Usually we have those at the end of our agenda when most of the public is gone or not listening. And so we figured, since the committees have been very busy, we'd like to use this time to kind of move it up in the agenda so that the public can hear a little bit more about what's happening at the committee level. So I'm just gonna actually just go down the line for the counselors to give a committee update. So starting with Counselor Scyther, do you want to give an update on communications and other town committees you support?
Sure. So communications met this past Thursday. As is going to be kind of our standing agenda, will be to assign authors for Counselor Corner articles. And we also discussed the upcoming Counselor Corner Live, which has been set for March 2nd, the topic being the GMO. It's at the Public Safety Building at 6 p.m. And so we also talked about making sure that our committee goals are aligned with the council goals. And really, in the short term, we have a set amount of planning that we need to do. But then as a committee, we also are going to have some longer term discussions. One to plan our community outreach event as a council. And then secondly, we anticipate that we will be the committee leading the charge on the second iteration of the community-wide survey. And so we know that that's on our plates, and you know, as the year gets closer, we can talk about when that survey wants to go, you know, when we want to put that survey out, but we did it in the fall. And so that's certainly on communications radar. For liaison reports, sustainability met this morning. They, with the leadership of Autumn, are very excited to discuss how to align their goals with council goals, also in terms of making some ordinance suggestions, something concrete. And so they will start that work in an upcoming meeting. They also talked about the co-planning that's happening for Scarborough Sustainability Day, which is happening in conjunction with a few of our other committees, Conservation Commission, of course, and that has been set for October 1st. And so since they were not able to, since it was decided that October 1st made sense for Sustainability Day, they are also looking to do some things around Earth Day in terms of some educational opportunities and partnering with the library and some of our other resources in town to make sure that those educational opportunities are happening for our residents. And I think that covers me.
So if you haven't gone on Facebook or Instagram, we're also trying to do some recorded videos of counselors. So there's a really great one on there right now, if you guys want to go on and watch it. So again, trying to find different ways to engage with the public that Counselor Scyther has been ushering. So I did my video, but I think other counselors. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
a great one. I think there are 10 Instagram hits right now.
I think they're all.
Yeah. I know.
Yes, good. Put in a plug for yourself. And, you know, as a heads up to the other counselors, we have discussed making some more varied content and, you know, making some Facebook and Instagram materials, you know, capturing maybe some of your fiscal education, you know, even if we just made one or two that we put out around the budget, you know, just something that was a little bit more dynamic that people would interact with differently than they do print material. So that's something that we're working on too.
Counselor Clucci.
So I don't have anything like that. Long range planning is preparing a field trip to visit different sites around not just Scarborough, but other towns to better understand what types of design standards we like or don't like, with a particular focus with the first cut going to be on the Eight Corners area, and hopefully coming up with new standards for how we guide development in that area. So that's kind of exciting. The field trip's going to happen in early March, and I suspect this work is going to take place over a pretty extended period of time. Eventually, it will result in recommendations to ordinance and to the council. Finance committee met last week. We had a nice presentation from our finance director on what is a bond, which is very informative and linked in the packet if you want to understand details about bonds a little bit better. We took action to get access to the audit portal for members of the finance committee. And this is really just a tracking mechanism, really. So there's a lot of requests that go out to staff, and when they're completed, it's tagged. So it gives us, I found it helpful, a little better insight into where we are with the audit and where we're not, where we might need to create focus. We also adopted the budget review schedule, which is now, I believe, published on the town's website. And we talked about unassigned fund balance. And before I get into unassigned fund balance, we did review projects that currently have bonds authorized, but we have not issued the bonds. We looked at the full list. And at our next meeting, I suspect that we'll look at a bond order to rescind a good number of those. And that could result in something that comes to the council in a few months. The next meeting that we have, I hope to get an update on unassigned fund balance. But I also want to look at all of our capital projects that have been approved in the budget, but haven't been funded yet. We haven't issued bonds or authorized bonds on them yet. I want to understand essentially what's in the queue, what's been approved, but it hasn't been executed as of yet. With that, after the meeting, we did talk about fund balance, as Mr. Hayes said. Councilor Shu asked a good question, like, well, when you throw one number out there, like 2.4% out of context, it doesn't have a lot of meaning. What does our history look like? And that's what I emailed you. I just wanted to pull up that graph of what, and you can, I guess, view this how you will, but over the last 15 years.
Sorry, let me share.
Yeah. So this is all from the annual statement. There's I think it's called Schedule 3 that details different fund balances. One of them is our unassigned fund balance, which is what our policy tends to key off of. Interesting, our bond rating agencies look more towards how much total fund balance you have available for use. So that's something that I have not dove into or studied, but according to our policy, we're targeting 10% not to go below 3. We've been, not to go below 8.3, sorry. We've been below 8.3 for a good portion of our history. We are currently in the 2.5% range. So that, I think gives you a little better context, and it's still, we're not in a great spot relative to our policy. We're not, I didn't throw an average on there, probably should have. We're probably not drastically below our average right now.
All right. Anything else, Counselor Clucci?
That's all I have. Tom looks like he
No,
wanted.
I just, I hadn't had a chance to catch up with Councilor Clucci since that meeting, but I think there must be a difference in the way that's being calculated. And I say that just based on thinking back and remembering past auditor presentations that have been reporting a percentage. So I want to make sure that I understand how you're calculating that and how our auditors have been doing that right along.
Yeah, it's from Schedule 3. So it's straight from the annual statement. There's 3 funds, or different years, there's different funds, but yeah.
That much is certainly consistent. It's just a matter of what's included in calculation for the unassigned fund balance. So I'd be pleased to work with you to make sure we're reconciling which approach.
Yes.
And I think just as a reminder for council goals as well, we're looking to get quarterly reports to the council on our financial statements. And I know that's something that we have on leadership for our next meeting, likely to talk with Tom about, of figuring out with this information in general, in terms of quarterly reporting. I think it would be good to have one in March that really just kind of gives a snapshot of, H1 financial performance with some key metrics. So hopefully the two of you can align on what this number is supposed to be and make sure that we're bringing that information forward for the council to look at. All right, Counselor Shoup. Let me stop sharing.
So the Appointments and Negotiation Committee has been tasked out of the goals to create an ad hoc community service committee. And so right now we're working on the charge. We have a draft charge that we're kind of just fine tuning. And so after our meeting next March, we're hoping by the mid-March meeting that we'll have something for you guys to look at and hopefully approve, so we can move on to the next phase of staffing this committee and starting the process for a community center, exploring all the options and availables and all the things that we're going to explore in regards to that. Although the Appointments and Negotiation Committee is not in charge of this, I'm going to make a quick comment that we do have a seat on the Portland Water District, and that seat was emptied when Seth Garrison left and became the director of the Portland Water District. Seth actually reached out to me again and just wanted to remind me, and I think he reached out to me as well and wanted to kind of relay that this is actually a really important role. In part, what people might not realize is that when you're on the Portland Water District, a lot of the things they deal with is actually conservation and watershed protection. So I'm going to be reaching out to some of the committees that I serve on and see if there are people interested in that. So I do serve as liaison of the Conservation Commission. Conservation Commission has eaten up our goals and they are ready to rock. They provided their first memo to the planning board for their meeting next week in regards to one of their applications that they have concerns about. That's really exciting for me to see. That was a very quick, this is what we're going to do. We're implementing it. And so I think that's great. The Conservation Commission, we met earlier this week. We are actually working on a workshop that is going to be part of town council for April 19th. Is that right? And so right now we are currently working with the Conservation Commission, the Land and Conservation Board, and the Scarborough Land Trust, or any other parties. And we're kind of forming what that workshop is going to look like. We kind of already know what it's going to look like, but we obviously want to hear feedback if anyone has any ideas in regards to that. And I think those are the biggest things going on right now.
Great. It's exciting to hear about the ad hoc community center getting ready to kick off and hopefully, get that going. Counselor Katarina.
Yeah, affordable housing, our big thing is we've passed along to council and ordinance we talked about was the conversion of hotels to workforce housing. So you guys will be working on that. Senior advisory, regretfully, I haven't been able to make the meetings because they switched their times to the middle of the day. And I'm not retired, so it's hard for me to make it, but that's all right. they're in good hands. Maine Municipal Legislative Policy Committee, we're still kind of, feel like we're spinning our wheels a little because we have, this is a state committee, of stakeholders throughout the state, municipal stakeholders. Because the legislature has a ton of lists of bills, but nothing, in other words, they call them titles, but nothing underneath. So it's like, okay, that sounds good, but what are you talking about? So like tomorrow's meeting, instead of being all day on Zoom or in Augusta, is gonna be like only a couple hours, because we're still waiting on more meat in that. The school board has asked me if I would be on a communications subcommittee regarding their plans for school. And I said, sure, I would do it. I reminded them that, you know, I'm not representing any side, so to speak. I'm just a conduit for, you know, how some ideas on how they can or should be communicating and bringing it back to council and for counselors to comment on and bring it back. So far, I haven't heard when their first meeting is, so not sure about that yet. And then I volunteered to be on the working group for cannabis since I was in, I'm looking at my friends in the front row here. Since I was in on the ground floor of that, it's the chair of ordinance back when. I felt that I have the history. So you will hear more about that later on the agenda tonight on moratorium to look at, you know, what's what and whatever. And rules and policy, I keep, you know, doing a good job of saying no, no. So that's it. Thanks.
All right, Counselor Hamel.
Thank you. Two committee updates from my role as liaison. First, Coastal Waters and Harbor Committee. Elections were held and current officers were reelected by unanimous vote for next terms. Michael Slavin as chair, Vinnie Clow as vice, Liam Erickson as secretary. Key agenda topics, there were a couple. We had a meeting in January, which was coordinated by Marvin Gates with representatives who do various types of testing of our waters and wetlands. And that meeting included Angela Blanchett as director of engineering. She helped to facilitate the meeting for us, along with Todd Souza, who tracks E. coli for determining safe beaches, and then Josh Roy in the sanitary district, and Robin Saunders also was there from the Long Range Planning Committee and former planning board. So the committee recommended considering Conservation Commission for potentially coordinating this group to look at the possibility of establishing metrics, timing, and some form of reporting, including a potential town website posting. They thought there would be some value in that in terms of trying to have a running total of you know, the health of our waters and wetlands. So I'm due to follow up with Randy Hogan as the chair of the Conservation Commission. So if she's seeing this for the first time, sorry, I haven't had a chance to call yet. So we also discussed pier and ramp repairs. Gene O'Neill reviewed a high level quote from Haley Ward for repairs to the commercial pier and the pedestrian pier, also known as the ramp or the walkway. The overall condition of the commercial pier was good, with wear and tear to some of the deck pieces. Some steam cleaning and minor repairs would be needed. The thought was to possibly refer that to Public Works Department for considering getting that done in-house. The ramp is a different story. It's near the end of its useful life, so there is an initial high-level quote to just bring it to standard for $50,000, but a much higher estimate for replacement. So the committee will be coming forward with a detailed statement of work and a request for replacement of the guardrail and cross bracing to be put in place so that will be functional and used by the public this season. The next meeting will address a request from Sue Bailey Clow and Vinnie Clow, the owners of the Stern Restaurant, for actually designating parking spaces under their 2010 lease agreement. So that's and then finally, we heard from Kevin Roach, who's the president of SOS Sago Bay. Saco and a couple of other shoreland towns in York County applied for ARPA funds, and they were able to purchase a dredge to service local communities. This was referred to us by Tom. So Darren Renata has offered to follow up for tracking developments there. So they're looking potentially for us to have somebody as a, member community representative. So my guess is there's probably some sort of number tied to that in terms of, participating with that group, but it would give us the opportunity potentially to use that dredge for shoreland dredging. The Army Corps does dredging for our moorings and our waterways in the harbor, but this is additional dredging that we would do and be able to have, access to a dredge for that at a much more favorable rates than the Army Corps. So those developments are all tied directly to the town council goal of sustainability, conservation, and climate change. And that's the same sort of connection for us with the next commission, which is the Shellfish Commission. We also elected new officers. New chairman Noah Nygren was elected, and Vice Chair Robert Roulette and Secretary Will Hamill were reelected also by unanimous vote of those present. We're pleased to report that we received approval from the DMR, the Department of Marine Resources, for our request for approval of the 2023 shellfish licenses. So we were kind of on pins and needles over that. So it looks like the conservation work paid off, and they've approved our request. That would potentially result in reducing a commercial resident and a non-resident license by one each in the event that those become available. We would not remove anybody's current license. We're working on revising and updating the shellfish ordinance. We're behind on this because of the time we devoted to try to get our license recommendation out, but we expect to have that to the council after our next meeting in March. And finally, the committee discussed a matter of an enforcement issue. So they're going to be requesting, some help and perhaps a visit by Brian Longstaff to explain to the group an issue with a dock. At the end of Winnick's Neck that remains in the intertidal zone and obstructs access and passage across the mud flats for harvesters. So I regret to have to bring that up, but it is something that the committee felt we needed to have a follow-up on that and find out what the status is. That is all.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor McGee.
All right, thanks. So we have library meets tomorrow night, SEDCO meets tomorrow morning. So I'll provide you an update on what happened at our last ordinance meeting, and some of that is on tonight's agenda. The bulk of our meeting had to do with the understanding of different marijuana ordinance terminology, different classifications, and then there was a discussion regarding some of the licenses that we were seeing tonight on the agenda, as well as a brief discussion over some zoning and overlay districts. The items that did not get taken up in ordinance that would be at our next meeting is the discussion on motel hotel conversion. I think is going to come back for kind of another look, as well as discussion on some fuel cell technology. So those are the two big items right now. I know there are a couple more pending for the agenda, but until they get solidified, I'll wait on updating everyone.
Great. And then on my end, just to update a little bit on the school project, more for the public, because I think the council is getting a communication now bi-weekly from the board chair and myself. So they are in process of revisiting their business case, and they're including a 4-school option. We're actually meeting with them on Friday to just kind of get an update and offer any feedback to help get that business case to a final point for the council. They're also wrapping up their enrollment study, and that will be on their March 2nd school board meeting agenda. So if you're available and want to learn more about the enrollment, that's going to be feeding into this business case. Again, that'll be a deeper dive into that. I know there's a lot of interest by different members of the council on that topic. And then lastly, they're engaging with a PR professional to see if they can get some additional support with communication. So those are kind of the big things that they have underway right now. And then we met, Tom and I, yesterday with the Metro Coalition, which is a group of chairs and town managers and mayors from the greater Portland area. It's not every community, but there's 7 of us that meet. It's hosted by GPCOG through the Metro Coalition. And really yesterday, the focus really was around their housing strategy. So we just talked a lot about the GMO here, and they're working on strategies and services to help communities work through some of the challenges we have around low income and affordable housing to really help with the economy. So that's been a huge challenge, is finding people who can work and make sure that they have houses that they can afford. And so they're working on a regional strategy, and in the future we'll have services that we may want to look into and potentially leverage based on the learnings with other communities. That was the big takeaway there. All right, anything else from anyone? Thank you all for your thorough updates. Clearly, we're all off to the racetrack in terms of getting to work with our committees, and it's great to hear all the progress that we're already making. Next up, moving on to our public hearings, is order number 23-014, 7 p.m. public hearing on the proposed amendments of chapter 601, the Town of Scarborough Transportation Ordinance, section 25, parking restrictions, one-way streets and alleys to one-way streets. And this is something that we discussed last week. I don't know, Autumn, if there's anything you want to do to set it up before I open it up to public comment.
Certainly, just as a reminder, this is a concern that came up to staff concerning the one-way status of Berry Road. And we did take that through ordinance committee, and we brought it forward with a recommendation to keep Berry Road as a one-way status as it was approved by the planning board originally.
Great. Is there anybody in the public, online or in person, that would like to comment on this item? Great, I'm seeing nobody in the room and nobody online, so I'm closing the public hearing for that item. Next item is order number 23-015, 7 p.m. public hearing on the proposed amendments to chapter 601, the Town of Scarborough Transportation Ordinance, section 25, parking restrictions, F, locations for no through trucks over 26,001 pound signs. This is also brought forward by the planning department.
Correct. Yes, this was brought forward by a request from the neighbors and on the Two Rod and Beach Ridge Road area. There is some industrial zoning that is on Two Rod Road. And so the Long Range Planning Committee looked at that and looked at the request to address the zoning and possibly address traffic. And what was brought forward was to post this as a no-through road. And that's what is before you tonight with chapter 601.
Great. Is there anybody in the public who would like to comment on this item? Or anybody online? Do not see anybody online or in the room. So I am closing the public hearing for this item. Next item, moving on to old business, is order number 23-007, second reading on the request to amend chapter 311, the schedule of fees relating to moorings and pier use. This was brought to us by the Coastal Waters and Harbor Committee. Councilor Hamel, is there anything you want to add on this one?
Not really. This is just something that's been a long time in coming. We haven't updated our fees in a while, and Darren Granat also deserves great credit, and also the committee's support for doing analysis and comparing our fees to neighboring towns. And so you're getting a second look at this, and very comprehensive job. And we expect there's going to be some sticker shock when we get into the season. So but we're going to use these fees to try to help us repair the ramp and other things like that we've been behind on.
Great. Is there anybody in the public who'd like to comment on this item? Or anybody online? All right, can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? No? All those in favor? All right, it's unanimous. Next up is order number 23-005. Act on the following new request for a marijuana license, Alpine Cannabis Company LLC, located at 15 Holly Street, Unit 205B, for a medical marijuana products manufacturing facility. Liam, would you like to tee this one up for us?
Sure. So this originally came before council for a public hearing. It was tabled following a staff inspection that found they were not ready for approval yet, or recommendation for approval. The staff did a follow-up inspection last week, and all of the deficiencies cited in the initial inspection had been corrected. The council or the staff have no reservations with recommending approval.
Great. All right, can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Counselor Hamel?
Yeah, yeah, I know there was a lot of discussion about these two things as well as other, other issue of the moratorium. And I thought that the point here would be first to discuss, how we felt about it. I had the opportunity to visit with the two owners actually early this morning, at their, being very flexible to accommodate, a chance for me to actually see the facility and visit it. And, really quite buttoned up in terms of what they described to me in terms of their operations and, the fact that they had invested a lot of money up to this point. So, it's quite clear they are focused and, are attuned to the issues that have been raised in the neighborhood. So at least I want to thank them for that. Evan and Sam, thank you for that too. But I don't think that I'll be supporting this, for related reasons, that has been raised by folks in the neighborhood. And the fact that this is, even though this is permitted use according to current zoning, concerned about those issues.
Okay. Any other counselors like to comment on this item?
I would
Counselor Shoup?
I would just say I really appreciate the descriptive email that we received today from the Alpine Cannabis Company. As someone who does not understand this field at all, it's hard to believe when someone just says, oh, it's not going to smell. And so I think after talking to a couple counselors, and I think this was a great move on part of the applicant to really educate us on what it is they're doing there. And so I just wanted to say, I think we all got a really good in-depth view of what they're doing there, and I appreciate it. So thank you.
Counselor Clucci?
Yeah, we've obviously received a lot of feedback from the residents. It is a residential area. I thought the email from Alpine was actually very well put together and very thorough as well. This one, I can't support allowing marijuana use at this particular location. And there's an odd history to it that I think we need to sort out and figure out before we set a precedent that could allow it. So, I think there's no right answer sometimes. And in this situation, the zoning map that we have said that this use wasn't allowed. Our marijuana, we've been denying it for a number of years, and we figured out we made a mistake. We corrected the mistake, but that mistake, had an impact on the people living next door to this office building. And I don't know that they've had their say or their due process when we went and corrected that change. So that's, I think when we do adopt a official zoning map, we'll have something to refer to that is the actual, this is what the council acted and said. And I think that will help alleviate this problem from happening again. But until we resolve some of those issues, I can't support allowing marijuana at this building.
Counselor Katarina?
Yeah, I will be supporting this. And the reason for that is, this is not cultivation. This is, whatever it's called.
Manufacturing.
Thank you, manufacturing. I should know that. And to me, it's very different than having a cultivation facility. Yeah, there was some question about the zoning and whatnot. I don't feel it's right to penalize a business owner who was acting under the rules that were told that they were to follow in order to be approved. I will remind the community that one of our order coming up is going to be a 90-day moratorium on looking at, what we're doing with marijuana establishment licenses. But I feel that we should pass this license and then let the working group work on whatever, let these guys do what they're gonna do, and tomorrow's a new day.
Counselor McGee?
Sure, and just for those in the audience or anyone here that didn't get a chance to watch ordinance last time, we had a pretty good review of this and then license that's coming up in a minute. You know, this current company is not planning to have any canopy or grow or produce any types of related odors out of this operation. This is more of a candy making. I didn't call it candy, but it's for edibles. So that in and of itself does have some meaning to me on this. That, and I do appreciate the how upfront the owners have been, not with just the town, but with the neighbors in the area. I think it's when you get to these licenses, I think sometimes we tend to forget that this really should be like a welcome party into the community, because for us and for the applicant, they need to take it seriously that they are members of this community, that they have neighbors, that we expect them to be, you know, a part of a healthy, happy Scarborough. So it's not easy. It's not easy to look at an issue like this and be so black and white. I take, some comfort in the fact that during our ordinance committee meeting, there will be a working group of homeowners, marijuana cultivators and manufacturers will be part of this working group. The town will be, and the idea is that they're going to come back to us with some suggested changes that we can implement on our level. Personally, I feel based on what I know about this one company at this one location, I'd be willing to support the license. I guess my only question for either staff or for the chair would be, is this something that can automatically come back to the council for approval versus just administrative renewals? Is that something that we could add as a condition to the license?
Liam?
I believe you can. Also, the council reserves the right under the administrative renewal to bring any license renewal back before the council for consideration. So they could, you don't need to prescribe that, but I certainly don't see any issue with.
Just hate to
prescribing
forget about it would be the thing, right?
We won't care.
So I guess that would be my recommendation. In order for my support of this, I would support having them come back in a year and have the council approve it as well, not so much as on the administrative level, just because I think it'd be important to get the feedback from residents in the area as to how it has been operating, if they've been a good neighbor, if they should continue to operate. That's what would be meaningful to me.
Do we need a motion to amend the order to capture that, or is that something that can be captured in the minutes as a specific request?
Certainly the minutes can be clear in that regard. But by the same token, you could offer an amendment and add language to the actual council action to give it even more weight if you wish.
Okay. Before we do that, why don't we hold off and see if there's any other?
I just wanted to, I originally was planning to make a motion to request that in this very much the spirit that the ordinance committee followed in terms of having a really broad discussion before they started deliberating on the status of these two licenses. And I might point out that these licenses are only here now, and we're only talking to them because we did not really follow advice to kind of do this in a single motion. Okay, we prevented that from happening the last time this was before the council. So the opining and the discussion, the broader discussion that I thought was going to happen by leaving this these two items as action items because they're old business is not really happening the way that I expected. So I would like an opportunity to expand upon my comments if the chair would be so inclined to grant me that.
Let me see if there's any other additional comments first. Counselor Seither?
I'll go and then Dawn, you can have the floor. So I, as a member of the ordinance committee, asked a lot of questions at our ordinance committee meeting to drill down to what I could, well, for lack of a better way to say it, just what was fair to the residents who live there, who may have been impacted by a incorrect zoning map. What is fair to business owners who have done every single thing that the town has asked them to do, who have invested money into a business that is an allowable use, and really kind of to try and figure out where exactly the rub is. Obviously, anytime we have two zones that are sometimes incompatible with one another, that there's going to be a rub. You know, we have restaurants and residents in other parts of town that where those two zones come together, there's some conflict. And then you add in, you know, the fact that marijuana cultivation itself can be kind of a charged topic, and there's going to be a lot of opinion and really strong personal feelings on this one. And so I just wanted to say thank you to everybody who came to ordinance, everyone who has emailed, the business owners who have come, because it has done so much to inform my decision. And so where I've landed on this is what I didn't want to do was approve the license for the business because they had crossed their T's and dotted their I's, and then have the rug pulled out from under them if we decided that we didn't want this to be an allowable use. And I wanted to be very transparent about that, if that was the direction that I saw the council going in. That is potentially still something that can happen. We have that authority to do that. I also want to be really fair to the residents that this isn't something that they want as an allowable use. We've heard that loud and clear. I think that the primary concerns that I have heard, though, are about the odor. And because this is a manufacturing license, I think that it should be approved. I will be supporting its approval with the condition that the working group, you know, not only takes into consideration that manufacturing is separate from growing, but that we get feedback on both of those types of use in this zone.
Right, Councilor Hamel?
Yeah, I'd like to just go back to this again. The fact is, though, this seems like a very simple thing, a very simple decision, you know, to approve these two licenses. It has vast implications. And I want to thank, you know, Councilor Sider for, you know, delving into this in more detail and giving us a little bit of a flavor for the discussion. But there was a very extensive, deep discussion about all aspects of this. So the issue basically that we're talking about is to approve these. And even though the current folks, the Alpine folks, are only have a manufacturing license and you know, have no plans to do cultivation. If we approve this, then potentially that's grandfathered. If we went back and tried to change the zoning, or we have to, you know, the only thing they're subject to in terms of an annual review would be, you know, licensing renewal, and that tends to be a very, very low hurdle for them to follow. Most people don't follow that very closely. So, and the residents who've complained about this, you know, are agreeing to possibly participate in a working group. They get a working group, and basically they have, you know, a marijuana operation at the industrial space that's part of an overlay that, you know, was a question of whether it should have ever been extended to this area, which is a, you know, a very dense couple of streets that is residential. So you know, this is much more complicated than it seems in terms of a simple action. And one of the options was originally to have these two applicants and the two licenses be covered by the moratorium period. And I'm concerned that you know, that we're skipping right over that as a possibility, and that will not, you know, if we act on these, that will not come up in the subsequent discussion, you know, of this moratorium, which I think is actually very well written and was revised to accommodate the possibility of them still getting approval for a license following the work of this group. The final thing I'll say is that we have and I don't want to steal Liam Gallagher's thunder on this, because he did an outstanding job turning on a dime with no real notice to try to get us a handle on the odor issue. And you know, there've been over 100 complaints, and over 70% of those were related to, you know, to that particular area of Pine Point, which is my neighborhood, and which continues to be problematic in terms of odor, with no real progress in terms of any type of enforcement action. No fines have resulted. Nothing has resulted from those complaints. Nothing. So that's the current state. And if it seems like a harsh thing or a high bar for the applicants, that's because we're trying to weigh the interests of dozens of residents on 2 streets with a couple of applicants.
Counselor Katarina?
Yeah. I would be happy to put something forward that would address Mr. McGee's concern and perhaps make people feel a little better about this if possible, some wording to the effect of that this particular license will be returned for council review at time of license renewal.
Can I get a second
Second,
discussion?
Can we have some discussion about what the effect of that would be? What would
You won't have your discussion.
well, I'm curious about how others think that would work.
So
Oh.
I think some of that effect is ultimately going to be dependent on the recommendations that come out of the working
Yeah.
group, which is another item on the agenda. So, for me, you know, just to correct the record slightly where, you know, the council has the ability to change our zoning and change our fees, our licensing fee. So essentially, if this were to move forward tonight as approved, and the feedback from the working group is that we want to remove this from zoning, we could update our licensing fees to make conditional items. The applicant isn't necessarily grandfathered
That's right.
into renewals because of the zoning change. So
That's correct.
we would have to adjust both our licensing
license.
fees and our zoning. That could actually, if we get to a point in the next year where we see that applicant is, you know, causing issues in that community, we don't approve the license and they essentially couldn't do business there anymore. And that goes back to Counselor Scyther's concern of if that's really the will of the council to essentially remove cultivation and manufacturing from that area, the challenge about should this be in the moratorium or not, frankly, I think the reality is the applicant submitted their application under the current rules. And so I think the current rules are really what's gonna dictate this. So I think even if we go into that discussion and do that potential removal of the zoning and changing the license, there could be a possibility where, you know, that applicant may not be able to continue to do business there in the future. And so that's kind of a thing that business owner will need to consider, is that there is a risk that if they decide to move forward,
Right.
that in a year from now, the council could pull that application and not renew it. Depending on what comes out of the working group.
So I'm going to make a motion that we
still-
postpone.
we still have,
Oh, sorry.
we have to vote on,
So
Yeah.
explain the
amendment.
process to me, please.
So we're still on the amendment, discussing the amendment that Counselor Katarina
Oh, I'm sorry.
put forward. So discussion on the amendment to add the condition that the license has to come back to the council when it's time for renewal. Counselor McGee?
Yeah, I just wanted to answer Council Hammer's, question. What could we see next year that makes a difference? And the answer for me is if the applicant who has indicated that this is very low impact, maybe 2-3 employees and not even every day of the week and no retail traffic, no odors. If I find out that's not the case a year from now, then my vote changes and hands down, I'm going to come down on the side of the residents on that one. So that's what's doing this for me at the moment. So.
Well, God willing, some of us will be here
Any-
by then.
Any more discussion
Let
on
me know.
the amendment? No? All right, so I'm gonna call the vote. All those in favor for the amendment? All those opposed? All right, so that's 6 in favor, so motion passes. So now back on to the main motion for the as amended for discussion. Any other comments? Counselor Clucci?
Just because it hasn't brought up it, so I think right now at the snow canning facility, we have 15 plus marijuana establishments. This particular property has a whole number of suites or spaces. Previously has not been allowed Otherwise, it would probably be filled with marijuana as well. So I mean, I'm really leaning that I don't think we should have marijuana in this building after the review of the committee. I'm glad that we're going to talk about a moratorium afterwards, but I feel like, it's not just this one applicant that we have to worry about. It's what do we want this area to look like? And that's what's helping to inform, I guess, where I'm at on this one.
Any other comments? So I haven't commented yet. Yeah, this I came in one position and now I'm waffling a little bit. Because of what you just said, Counselor Clucci, but also, also what Counselor Scyther said about, do we want to put a license forward that, the intent of the council, I think, is likely to not have marijuana there. And so I'm leaning towards potentially suggesting, because I think there's still concern about that specific claim, that it may be worth including this one in particular within that moratorium. But then I go back and forth because, again, I really do feel strongly that it's a manufacturing business. It has the odor, I think, has been the biggest complaint that we've heard about around this. And I hate because odor in another building is impacting the ability for a business owner to conduct their business that really should have no impact on the community whatsoever. So as I'm talking out loud, I'm thinking, and I'm changing my mind again, that, again, this one's tough. This one's tough. Like, I really think for this one, I'm going to vote to move it forward. And I'm hoping that when we talk about the moratorium, we're very clear for staff what we need that working group to address, to make sure if there is a need to make sure that we have the right tools as a council to be able to pull that particular license if we need to, that we make sure that that's something that the working group explores. So with that, I'm gonna call the vote on this one. All those in favor? All right, all those opposed? All right, so 5 in favor, 2 opposed, motion passes. And next item on the agenda is order number 23-012. Act on the following new request for a marijuana license, HASB LLC, located at 10 Snow Canning Road for a medical marijuana cultivation facility. Liam, would you like to tee this one up?
Sure. This is again for a medical marijuana cultivation facility at 10 Snow Canning Road. This proposal would replace an existing licensed operation. So again, there's no expansion of space. Staff conducted a thorough inspection today. They meet all the requirements of the existing ordinance.
All right, any questions for Liam? No. All right, I apologize because in the last order, I forgot to ask the public to come up for comment if they had a comment on Holly Street. That's my fault. I missed that opportunity. But now I am going to open it up for public comment for this item. So if anybody wants to offer public comment on HASB LLC, if you could come up to the podium, you have 3 minutes. And for those for Holly Street that I skipped, when we get to the moratorium, I would ask that you come up and offer your public comment then. So anybody in the public that would like to comment on HASB? No? All right, can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Oh, sorry, thank you. You guys can see. All right, Kim, I'm going to, do I have to do it or do you do it?
Kim, you should be able, if you unmute yourself, you should be able to speak.
So Ms. Kunkel, you're going to have to unmute yourself if you would like to give public comment. All right, well, Ms. Kunkel, we can come back to you if you can unmute yourself. Oh, there you go. Oh, you muted yourself back. All right, so there we go. Mrs. Kunkel?
It's me controlling
Okay.
being able to talk. They're not actually. Sorry, we can come back to the resident.
All right, anybody in the public? Again, one more time? No? All right, can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second,
All right, any discussion? Counselor Hamel?
Here we go again. Okay, so the biggest problem we have, we think, are 16 or 17 or so operators in 10 Snow Canning Road that generate a lot of odor, okay? And that has not been mitigated, it has not been resolved. And here we go again. Well, some reason, well, it's just, taking the place of somebody who, left the business and stopped operating. If our goal is to really resolve this problem, then we either need to start, moving that type of operation out of that building or controlling it and managing it. And that the control and managing of it has failed. Okay, has failed. And this is a similar issue that we've had with the good neighbor ordinance and trying to manage noise complaints. We go through this time and time again. It takes dozens of very frustrated and rightfully so disappointed residents, and nothing happens. We've only issued one fine in that particular ordinance, and the person that was found in violation never paid the fine. So we're deluding ourselves if we think that all of a sudden we're gonna, get a hold of compliance. Our record is zero. 100 complaints, 0. So, I'm not suggesting that I'm a betting man, but those are pretty bad odds. So we're putting all of our energy and effort into this as a council because we want to do the right thing and we don't want to disappoint anybody. And we've got, I can't explain why the folks, from Bickford Street and from Holly Street aren't here this evening kind of speaking out. Hopefully Ms. Kunkel will have a chance to get let back in rather than go off, without having any comment on that from residents. But I just procedurally, this has been unfortunate. And, I'm going to hold my breath and hope that we do a 180 as a council between now and our discussion later this evening on the actual moratorium. But if this is any indication, I hope and pray and die in despair. Okay.
Counselor Katarina?
Yeah, as of 8:15 this evening, this use is legal and allowed by zoning at 10 Snow Canning Road. I've got a question for Mr. Gallagher. Is this a brand new license or is this a change in ownership? Or this is curiosity.
Yeah, it's a new license because it meets the definition of greater than 50%. So it's required to come back to council as a new license. It's a new LLC. It's just an existing cultivation operation.
So is it the same owners for the most
No.
part? Are there any of the same owners?
No,
in
that
this?
is-
They're all, it's an all new. ownership.
New LLC, new
Not that
ownership. Yep.
that particularly matters, but I was curiosity question. So for the reason that it is allowed as of 8:15 tonight, I will be supporting this. Again, with the reminder that we do have the working group that will be working. We've got this moratorium coming up. Hopefully we'll see how that goes. We haven't voted on it yet. The other piece of it is it's medical marijuana. And of course, medical marijuana is treated differently under state law than recreational. And that's the kind of a convoluted whatever. So this is why I'm urging for support for this license again, for the same reason the other one, they followed all the rules they're supposed to be doing. Right now it's legal. Yeah, we still have some ongoing issues potentially down on Snow Canning Road, but that's just where I'm coming down.
Counselor Scyther?
I certainly don't want to have my support of the previous license or whether or not I support this mischaracterized as support for the establishment themselves and in total disregard for what we've heard from the residents. I do not support the current use for Snow Canning Road. I don't think that it's appropriate. I think that we have heard from all of the neighbors and residents there that this is negatively impacting their life sometimes every day. I would not want my children or my house guests or my parents subjected to that. I think that it impacts their quality of life in a way that we as a council have a responsibility to answer to. That is why this is tricky, is because we have before us licenses that are in compliance with the current zoning. And so I'm trying to be as crystal clear here that I will vote in favor of the licenses that are in front of us because I feel like procedurally that is the right thing to do. But my ultimate support and where I'm going to come down on this after we get the results of the working group, which I don't have a crystal ball. The residents and the growers may come to agreements that I can't foresee, but unless the residents are happy with the situation, I'm not going to be in favor of these businesses being in this area. And so I'm going to go ahead and support the license like Jean Marie, because it's in front of us, it's an allowed use, and I feel like procedurally that's the right thing to do. But don't mischaracterize my support of two licenses for how I feel about the residents of Holly Street and Bickford Street.
Can I ask a question of Liam?
Counselor, are there other counselors who want to comment on this? Counselor Cucci?
So probably gonna be a game time decision on this one. I'm leaning towards supporting it because it's an existing operation. That having been said, I think we missed the mark on our marijuana ordinance, particularly density. I mean, we're not trying to turn any one area into a just marijuana. And that's what's happened is just marijuana in this area. And that has an impact on the people. I think we can certainly accommodate some of this, and then it'd probably be a little more controllable. So when we get to moratorium, maybe that's something to consider is how many of these establishments do we want to allow in one building, in one area? That's nothing to do with the applicant. I have no doubt that staff and the applicants following proper procedure with this, but there's a reason it comes to council too, so that we understand and can make discretionary judgments.
Counselor Shoup, did you have?
So I was just gonna say, I 100% agree with Counselor Slider and everything she said tonight. I think we should move forward with the application because it is allowed right now, but I think we need to then readdress with the work group, the current, what's going on there moving forward.
Counselor Hamel?
I had a question for Liam. So can you confirm this is a continuing operation or it stopped operating and is now being bought and started again?
I believe the previous, they had to stop and phase out whatever product was in there, and this is a new, I mean, they can't acquire sort of plants and product through a transaction or a sublease of a space.
So originally, we were gonna hold taking action on these two licenses for sake of discussing them at length in the context of the moratorium. We are heading in the direction of not doing that, okay? And even with Counselor Katarina's amendment, that's only gonna deal with licensing a year from now. So basically what we're doing is approving this, and then if we want to change the zoning and remove manufacturing from this particular location and or the Holly Street location, we will have a hard time doing that they will be grandfathered.
Point of information, Liam, can you help set the record straight? Because I think there's still confusion over, what is within the council's authority if we were to go to moratorium between both the zoning and the licensing. I tried to explain that, but I don't think I did a good job. And I think Counselor Hamel is making claims that I don't think are correct. And so I would really like it if town staff could give clarity in terms of what is it within our authority and what would be the outcome around this concept of grandfathering, because that was something that I thought the ordinance committee did a really great job exploring and getting to the bottom of, and my understanding is the decisions we make tonight are non-binding in terms of the decisions we can make in a year from now, depending on what comes out of that committee or that working group.
So I'll try. And a lot of this is based off of the testimony that legal counsel provided in ordinance. There is there is kind of two layers, as I understand it. There are under state statute around medical marijuana, there was a grant, again, forgive the term, I know it's not the appropriate term, but there was some grandfathering of existing medical caregivers that we license as medical cultivators that were in existence prior to 2018. Furthermore, when the council adopted this ordinance, they said that approved zones would be light industrial and industrial areas of town, which Snow Canyon Road falls into anyway. The distinction that I think was articulated at the ordinance committee was, well, there is some grandfathered uses generally under zoning. Licensing doesn't have the same requirements. And so while an establishment may have a claim to a grandfathered use under zoning, because we have a licensing component on top of that, you would not have to grandfather the license for that reason. You could, the council certainly could choose to grandfather existing operations. So within the context of the Holly Street parcel, there is a path where the council could, one way or another, amend the zoning of the Pine Point overlay, exclude that parcel from any marijuana use, while still grandfathering the licensed applicant if it's otherwise without concerns or issues. And so that was, I think, the distinction that was made during ordinance. Is that?
I think that was helpful. Okay. All right. Any other counselor comments?
I'd like to make one more comment. If
Okay,
I may,
Counselor Gann.
deferring to others, I'm sorry, I don't mean to be hogging the microphone of, negativity land here, but I am. The issue on this is that the licensing process has nowhere near the same sort of process that we would follow in terms of visiting on a zoning change. We've got continuing requests to move the licensing approvals to a single action, not even a first and second reading and a public hearing, one and done. We had that a couple of weeks ago, and I don't think anyone's going to remember that a year from now. What's our process to track it? It's a check in the box. There's no real process for our review and deliberation as a council on that matter. So suggesting there would be a way to do that someday in the future is, I think, not a fair comparison at all, procedurally, nor in terms of our responsibility to listen to our residents.
All right. So we're getting too into the moratorium conversation, so I want to move on with this from this item. So just to share my perspective, I also say what Councillor Shoup said. I think Councillor Slyther, you said it so eloquently, so I don't need to repeat it. Same thing as Councillor Katarina. So I'm going to support this tonight. So I'm going to move this to a vote. All those in favor? All right. All those opposed? All right. 6 in favor, 1 opposed. It passes. Next up is going on to new business, order number 23-019, first reading and waive the second reading on a 90-day moratorium on new or expansion of existing marijuana establishment licenses. Liam, would you like to tee this one up?
Sure. So as drafted, this as the order alludes to, it would be a 90-day moratorium on any new or expansion of existing marijuana establishments that are currently licensed, and that so expansion of existing that are currently licensed, and no ability to approve new licenses within the currently zoned areas for a period of 90 days. It sounds like there'll be some discussion here. I think that this item was brought forward with some, I think I understand some preliminary support from ordinance committee to commission a working group led by staff with some abutters to specifically the Snow Canyon Road facility, some industry cultivators and other people in the industry and other residents. So I think it was brought forward with that kind of in that tandem.
Just if I could, as a matter of procedure, this matters before you as an emergency ordinance. And what's important about that is that under Maine law, moratorium could be considered up to 180 days. But your rules under the emergency ordinance provisions limit that action of council to 90 days only. So to the extent that the working group isn't able to complete its task in that timeframe, we would certainly recommend that you consider imposing either an additional emergency action or a more formal traditional moratorium, really to afford enough time to do the proper study, if you will.
Mhm. All right, is there anybody in the public who, are there any questions for Liam or Tom? No? Anyone in the public who would like to comment on this? If you could state your name and address for the record.
So my name's Mike Shannon, Shannon's Best Buds. A couple of you know me, a lot of new faces out here. I'm actually going to touch a little bit on all three topics at once. Couple of you, I don't need to tell, we've been down this road quite a few times before. I'm concerned, encouraged in both directions. I think this has been quite the roller coaster of a meeting. I have a lot at stake here, as I'm sure a lot of people in this room do as well. We've had growing pains in this industry. There's probably going to be more to come as the industry evolves. There's a handful of factors at play here. And as we know, 99% of it comes down to the odor. As far as the commercial kitchen aspect goes, there's zero odor. None. You could turn that entire building into one kitchen and you would not smell it, other than the suites, as we've, I think heard a couple of you allude to. I've come to these meetings quite a bit since 2017. Been a part of a lot of these conversations. A lot of them are opinion based. I'm happy to take a call or take tours or do whatever I can to help, some of the people who are trying to educate themselves. Rather than coming to you guys with just my opinion, I'm a numbers guy. Numbers don't lie. So I asked my attorney to do a little bit of digging into some factual information. We had 100 odor submissions over 22 months. 63% of those were from one house. Of the 100, 14 were not cannabis, but actually a seafood odor, which I know, again, opinion, but I think we can all agree what smells worse. 13 did not specify an odor. Overall, the complaints came from a total of 7 addresses, which we've known for a long time. At a minimum of these, 14 had nothing to do with the industry. So 73 complaints came about cannabis, 63% of those from one house. As someone, again, who's by the numbers, that's 86% of cannabis complaints coming from one house. Take away that outlier, and you've got one complaint every 2 months for almost 2 years, which I believe is when the mitigation process went into place. So to say we've had zero progression forward or zero progress, no. Is it a perfect system? Probably not. What's perfect in life, though? We spent thousands of dollars on odor mitigation systems, as well as the other 15 plus, residents in that or other occupants of the building. So, we've had people that come to us who, again, everybody has a different palette of smell. I've had a family member who has an extremely strong nose, joked about a bloodhound. That's my mom. I could not get away with a damn thing growing up. She came and visited about a month after we put odor mitigation systems throughout the building, where I could assume everybody did. And she asked me what changed. She asked if people went out of business or what was going on, because when she came over the bridge, she didn't smell it. She didn't smell it until maybe she was right up next to the building once or twice. I haven't smelt it even outside of the building. Granted, I have probably a different nose palate at this point. But we've had other people that are very familiar with the place who thought that cannabis had actually subsided there, or at least retracted. There's a lot of things that we need to figure out, sure. But just my company alone employs 10 people. I personally employ more families that are at stake of potentially losing a job than households up on that street that might be affected. Again, I'm not saying disregard them. I'm saying let's all work together. But for some of us who have invested hundreds of thousands of dollars into their businesses, and probably some of them even more, to not have an ability to change the usage of yours from maybe medical to adult use, which is the exact same thing, and actually even, I would argue, better because there's more oversight. You couldn't sell a unit, transfer a unit, which basically makes your business worth zero. That's a paperweight. I actually have a background as a real estate agent. So I do believe, knowing, having looked at recent sales, there were a lot of sales on that street that took place well after we were all in business. Okay. Now, as a real estate agent, that's something I would probably tell my clients, but not everyone knows. So with that said, before we go, damaging potentially hundreds of families' livelihoods, let's strongly consider what we might be doing. Because some people like myself have made a lot of sacrifices in this industry, and you guys might not be aware, but a lot of us can't actually buy a home. So we don't even have that great problem of being able to sit in the backyard and be like, oh, I don't like that smell. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the public who would like to comment on this item? Anybody online? All right. You could state your name for the record. And just as a reminder, I'm gonna start enforcing this. We need to limit public comment to 3 minutes.
Denise Hamilton, 2 Rod Road here in Scarborough. I don't have a dog in the fight. But I think part of the problem here, going back to 2017, 18, 19, when marijuana was being discussed, is the town put the cart before the horse. We started approving cultivators before we had an ordinance in place. I have a cultivator right next door to me. I've complained over and over to the town before the ordinance, through the ordinance. We have a good relationship with our neighbor. He knows it's a problem at times. Being in a residential area is no place for marijuana growers. I'm not familiar with the manufacturing side. I know how the cultivating side affects us and our quality of life and enjoying our home and our yard, and we can't open our windows. Again, in the past, the town should not have approved anybody until an ordinance was in place, and a strong ordinance. I still don't agree with the ordinance in our area. That'll be my next fight. But again, I think the moratorium should be in place before any other licenses are approved. That's just my 2 cents.
Richard Hayes, Martin Avenue. I'm disappointed in your action tonight. I think the people in the residential area should not be subject to the cannabis industry at any level. I live in a little quiet street, and I would be very upset if somebody started doing something with marijuana or cannabis in my neighborhood. I'm sorry you took the action you did. I'm sorry that we didn't get a chance to say it before you voted. I would hope you reconsider, because it's just not right for the people to live in a residential, quiet neighborhood and have their families, children, whatever, subject to manufacturing, cultivating, whatever, any level of it. Shouldn't be in a residential neighborhood. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Darlene Smith. I live at 10 Bickford Street with my husband Dave Rabideau, and we are direct abutters of 15 Holly Street. My intention was to speak to the Holly Street one. We've attended several council and ordinance meetings regarding the issues we have in our neighborhood with marijuana establishments. We've been vocal from the beginning with the ongoing changes to our beautiful area, and especially dealing with the ongoing odors coming from the Pine Point area. We were told that with licensing comes rules, regulations, monitoring, and oversight for these businesses to continue. We've used the odor complaint survey too many times to count, and there's been no accountability and nothing has happened. We know that the Holly Street TVZ zone was part of the Pine Point Industrial Overlay District, allowing for light industry, food processing, warehousing, storage, and such. We also knew that in 2020, parts of this overlay district was allowing marijuana establishments as they were already ongoing and grandfathered. It was not until we attended the town council meeting this year on January 18th, we learned that Holly Street was included in that marijuana ordinance permitted zone. How would we have learned this information? The maps used for these zones were incorrect. It was brought to our attention on January 18th. The approved cultivation zones for marijuana establishments clearly show that Holly Street is not included to this day. And the only establishments that were conducting business were the ones that were conducting business as of 2020 south of the tracks or approved areas. We feel this was the intent, to allow those already conducting businesses to continue. We've since been told the approved cultivation map was wrong, and we have issue with this now, and we certainly would have had issue with it back in 2020 when this was enacted, had we known then. As discussed previously, the Holly Street location shares its lines with 5 residentials. Most of these are small lots. The Holly Street building is less than 100 feet from some abutters' homes. We feel the Holly Street property is not suited for marijuana establishments as it sits too close to residential abutters. We're being told that this particular license is for medical marijuana manufacturing with no inherent odor. However, we've learned that once the door opens for one, all are welcome to come. Please ask yourselves, if you were my neighbor and an abutter, would you want a marijuana establishment in your backyard? Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else in the public who would like to comment on this item? Nope. Oh, 2 online. Let me see. All right, Mr. Burke, we're gonna let you go first. If you can unmute yourself.
I think I did that. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Great. My name is John Burke. As part of my legal practice, I represent various cannabis businesses in Maine's medical and adult use cannabis program, but I'm also a resident of Scarborough. And my commentary today is on behalf of myself and not for any specific cannabis business. I provided you folks with written testimony in opposition to this proposed moratorium. There are a few reasons why, but I first really want to address some legal confusion here that's happening that I think needs to be clarified. First and foremost, state law prohibits any municipality from prohibiting or limiting the number of registered caregivers. There is absolutely no dispute about this. There's no gray area on it. It's clear and concise. A copy of the statute was provided to you, and the way that this current moratorium is prepared would likely put the town in legal jeopardy, because what it's doing is saying, hey, we're going to prohibit new applicants and effectively limit the number of licensees that already exist currently. There's nothing in statute that says a moratorium or a prohibition for a limited period of time would be an exception to that rule. For this reason alone, this moratorium should be rejected. Listening to some, and I hope that you have an opportunity to read the rest of my letter, which, some additional points there. But there was a discussion about grandfathering. And again, if you take a look at the statutory language I provided you, the grandfathering provisions are specific to caregiver retail stores, which are not permitted in Scarborough currently. We don't permit dispensaries. We don't have any testing facilities. In fact, there's very few in Maine anyways. And with manufacturing facilities, while we have a medical manufacturing license in Scarborough, what they really are caregivers, because the state never went ahead and created an actual license for manufacturing facilities. So while there is a grandfathering provision, it has nothing to do with the registered caregivers. A municipality may regulate them, but they cannot prohibit them and they cannot limit the number of them. If the town is really adamant on having a moratorium, the alternative solution here, while I don't agree with this point, would be to narrow its focus to the snow canning properties. But I would strongly urge you to reject a prohibition on these businesses to be able to expand, which by definition is very broad. That could include potentially them just adding a different type of service that is permitted under their license, not necessarily physical expansion of the facility. That has a substantial impact on these businesses, that it's already a very competitive marketplace. Any expansion, such as what the example I provided, would likely provide no additional odor in most cases. And if there were, and it would rise to having the expansion come back to the council, then the town council would have an opportunity to review that before allowing such. So I'm more than happy to answer any questions. I hope you've had an opportunity to take a look at my letter, but just for the legal reasons alone, this as written, this moratorium should be rejected. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burke. Next up is Ms. White. And if you could state your name and address for the record, and just as a reminder, you have 3 minutes.
Hi, I'm Heidi White. I live at 14 Bickford Street. I submitted a written letter at one of the previous meetings, and I did watch the ordinance meeting last week. And although the town attorney expressed no legal wrongdoing by the town by posting an incorrect overlay for zoning, I think it's important to note that you need to accept responsibility for the posting misleading information, and that's what the residents of Bickford Street and Holly Street were going on. And if that had been publicly available years prior to this application, we, the residents, probably would have had an opportunity to voice concerns prior to the permit application and take action prior to a license application. However, since the new information has now been clarified, the homeowners, multiple of us, and contrary to what the business owner of the cannabis thing who spoke earlier has stated, the fact that 63%, I am also a numbers person. I appreciate. I'm a math teacher, so I appreciate him running the numbers with his lawyer. However, as one of the councilmen stated earlier, we gave up with that form. So that's not true data, and anyone who knows statistics knows that it can be skewed in whichever way you want, but it was repeated attempts at filling out that form with no recourse whatsoever. So while we do support small businesses, and if it was a no impact situation, with the snow canning area, we would obviously live and let live. If we didn't hear it, I mean, my kids refer to Pine Point now as Pot Point because that's what you smell as you go over the bridge. Is that truly what this town council wants represented? Also, with regards to the Holly Street, because I was going to speak on that, although there was no public comment during that, the business park is a rare situation. And I would like, it's too late now, you already voted, but there's, 1,000 feet from schools can't be in the state of Maine, can't have these manufacturing or whatever, any facilities. And we could have dictated that in our town also, that we don't want it near residential areas. For the same reason that you don't have it in school zones, you shouldn't have it near bus stops or anything else. And it's just a sheer simple thing of, do you want it in residential areas? And the whole idea of this manufacturing candy having no impact on the area, then why didn't Scarborough allow it to happen in garages or basements in residential areas if there's no impact of the surrounding areas? You're forgetting these are neighborhoods and we don't want these type of businesses to be next door to people or them subjected to that. Also, I think the snow canning situation is a perfect example of why the Holly Street application should have been put on hold. We are now dealing with the Canning Road situation with no recourse. So now you've just approved a licensing application in the Holly Street. This one has no impact. The two gentlemen that seem to be, applying wrote you a lovely letter of all their intentions, but the reality is that's going to open the door. If another one comes forward, then some legal person is going to say to you that, well, we already have one in there and there's been no impact, so let's put this one in there. And you're going to get afraid that there's going to be legal action taken against you because they met all the permitting things. I do want to.
Ms. White, I'm going to ask you if you could please wrap up.
Okay, I just want to say all of these actions are being taken way too quickly. And although it's not your neighborhood, I'd like you to think of it as your neighborhood. Please come and spend some time there. Come in the summer and notice how we can't open our windows and just look at how closely the Holly Street place is 100 feet from my bedroom window. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next is Ms. Stretch. If you could please state your name and address for the record, and as a reminder, you have 3 minutes.
Hi, good evening. My name is Claire Stretch, and I'm a business owner at 71 Pleasant Hill Road. I'm a business owner with multiple cannabis licenses in Scarborough and Portland. I hold a manufacturing license in adult use and a medical manufacturing license in the town of Scarborough. And I'm grateful for this discussion. We are located in the industrial zone. We have robust security and we have no complaints that we know of. We don't abut any residential areas. And I felt because of my unique position that I would want to introduce myself to the community and to the council. I know that there's a work group going on and I've volunteered for that. And I think that I can bring some good perspective. And I really appreciate that the residents are being heard and the council is taking time to respect the state laws and the ordinance at large. So I just wanted to put myself out there and introduce myself, and I hope that I can work together. We'd also like to open up our facility to anyone that would like to come and see something that we do to the council to show what we do. We do make edibles. We manufacture caramels, chocolates, and confections, and would like to be a neutral representative, a positive representative. Again, we haven't had any complaints in our area, and we are good neighbors.
Thank you.
Oh, and please, if I could, I would like to implore you to not put a moratorium on, because the language that you have, it really does violate the state rule for medical, but additionally, it would affect me very seriously because of the wording that as an existing business operator, I would be afraid that I might not be able to continue my plan. I'm a small business owner. I do employ people, and to have that business plan cut off, even though I'm licensed and have been licensed for several years, because of a moratorium, because of a targeted set of problems on another side of town, it would impact my business. And I hope that it wouldn't, but I know that the moratorium would be the point that would actually hurt my business. And additionally, I would love to be a part of the work group. And I think that you can have the work group and we can find solutions for and hearing everyone without a moratorium specifically. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Stretch. All right. If there's nobody else in the room, oh, sorry.
Hi there, Dave Rapido, Bickford Street, Scarborough. Going off script once again.
I'm happy to work with the working group going forward. In 2020, when my wife and I were zooming in and talking about all of this, in particular Canning, Snow Canning Road, we were more than willing to try to work with people and be good neighbors and come to some sort of solution on this. I want to continue to do that. I think, as what Ms. Stretch just said, there are some answers to some of this odor mitigation. I definitely not want to be dismissed and told that this is a figment of my imagination. It's not. And I invite any one of you to come and sit in my backyard anytime. So happy to work with the group if I can. And thanks for listening.
Thank you. All right, is there anybody else in the public who'd like to comment on this? No? All right, can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second?
All right, any discussion? Counselor McGee?
Thank you. So I guess I'd have some requests, if a moratorium goes into place as to what the work group, or at least suggestions, and I don't know if this is the appropriate time or you just want to stay on topic, but
Okay.
I mean, things that for me make a big difference. The work group should engage the abutters within 1,000 feet of any industrial or light industrial overlay. So even if there's not currently a manufacturer or grower in that area, if it can be in that area, we should be engaging the people around there. That work group should be trying to find out what happens if that was put there. What does that do to my neighborhood? I think that's fair. I think we should investigate a buffer, a built-in buffer, as maybe a possible solution as far as how far away a specific facility needs to be away from either residential neighborhoods or other businesses. I think we need to investigate the methods and technology for odor mitigation, whether or not any changes to technology or doubling up on certain things. I think there should be, I think we should have consideration or discussion around retail and caregiver aspect as far as traffic impacts to neighborhoods. Well, and then I also would say that I think we should hold not only the owner of the business liable for the odors, but the owner of the building, because I think that the two of them go in tandem. I think Don made a point earlier, and I agree with it, which is we've failed on enforcement, or we've at least failed to follow up well on enforcement and responding to owner concerns. So for me, I think that should be a heavy focus too of the work group. You know, I can get you an attorney to tell you anything. Maybe this does violate state law, maybe it doesn't, I don't know. But to ask 90 days of the public to get our act together, I don't think it's a big ask. So that's my thought on that.
All right. Any other, Counselor Clucci?
Yeah, I support this tonight for 90 days. And I guess my request would be in that 90 days, can we make this more specific? Is this a townwide issue that we're really trying to understand, or is it isolated to the overlay district in Pine Point? And I'm assuming in some form, this is going to have to be continued. And that's, I think I would support, if it makes sense, a more specific moratorium past the 90 days.
Any other discussion points? Counselor Katarina?
Yeah, I have a quick question. Who drafted the moratorium?
Town attorney Phil Saucier.
Okay, that's what I thought. Because now that I'm sitting here looking at it a little more closely, seems like it's apparent to me that it covered all the questions that John Burke had. So it's fine as far as I'm concerned. So thank you.
Yeah. Any other discussion?
I had a question.
Yep.
Process question. So I'm just watching all of this go quickly by. And, you know, really contrary to prior conversations I've had with virtually every member of the council before the meeting this evening, including the chair. And in that conversation, we thought we were going to give really specific direction this evening before even approving the working group in terms of what we'd like to see. And everything I've heard is like poofy, okay? It's a pie in the sky. It's like a virtual, we're asking people for a virtual Christmas wish list, okay?
Counselor Hamel, are there specific items?
They
you
are
would like to
indeed, they are
request?
indeed, but I want to do a preamble first, if I may. The issue is there is no Santa Claus and there's no Easter Bunny, okay? So if we're expecting this stuff to miraculously happen, in 90 days, and then for us to really have an impact, I'm not encouraged so far in terms of how deliberate we've been as a council. So what I'd like to do, I'd like to go through a list of things that I think should be included. The other thing I wanted to mention is that Mr. Hall had committed to provide us with a source document that was at the root cause of the error that occurred with this overlay district being, including Holly Street. And we never did get that. So can we, when will that come? Will that also be on the Christmas wish list? Or will there be a date when we can get that? You committed that in the last meeting.
Point of information, Counselor Hamel, what is the specific ask you're looking for?
For Mr. Hall to provide the source document that was at the root of the part of the confusion about how this overlay district was approved by the council. And a map was included as a source record in the minute. We were supposed to get a copy of the minutes and the map.
I'm going to refer you to an email that the entire council received that provided all that information. So
Okay, so if I
my
missed that,
suggestion would be for you to go and check your email. Because
okay,
we all, as a council, received that
So-
probably 2 weeks ago.
Well, I wanted to go, so I asked for a copy of the zoning map
Mhm.
during the town manager's report last meeting, and the town manager agreed to provide it. He has not, but earlier this evening, I followed up on that request and asked what he was using as the official zoning map, and it is the online GIS system. So that satisfied my request.
so that is.
I would like to get a paper copy of it or a PDF of it, but understanding what we are using as the authoritative source was my primary concern.
And what was the date of that? What was the date of that?
What's
The date of the version of the online map?
it's live now.
Mhm. So just getting back to the conversation, Counselor Hamel, do you have specific
I do.
requirements? Would you mind?
Yes, I do indeed.
Okay, go ahead.
Number one, I would like the working group to consider, and actually I would like to start by having the ordinance committee revisit the issue of cultivation in the RF zone. You were advised by the planning board or the long range planning committee that it was possible for us to prohibit, that you could either leave it or remove it, and you said there was not support. There's not support to take a formal action. So I would like the ordinance committee and the working group to revisit prohibiting cultivation in the RF zone through an ordinance change. One.
It's already prohibited.
Okay. Number two, I would like to remove Holly Street and Bickford Street from an overlay zone related to TVC4, the Pine Point in industrial area, the Pine Point area where the 10 snow canning street facility is located. The third, I would like a legal opinion from the town attorney to address the question that Mr. Burke raised about us allegedly by any actions or by a moratorium somehow restricting caregiver and medical marijuana access if we were to prohibit cultivation. So those three.
All right, Counselor Katarina?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I believe what we're talking about is whether we're gonna impose, I can't even talk English now, a 90-day moratorium, and that is the focus
Mhm.
of discussion right now. I would like to call a vote.
I am not gonna call a vote right now. So is there any other items for discussion? Before I do that? I'm just gonna add a couple items myself from what Council Hamel said. So I just want to reiterate what I heard from both Councilor McGee.
I have a process question.
Mhm.
If someone calls a vote, you have to vote whether you're gonna call a vote or not. I mean, I'm just asking.
I think we can move the question, but as chair, I have the ability
I
to.
believe that's correct.
Okay, that's all.
Sorry.
Just curious.
Now, the full council can overrule.
I just
the
wanted
chair.
my best.
Yeah, the full council can overrule me if you would like to call the vote. No, okay.
State your piece.
Okay, yeah, I would like to state my piece first, if you don't mind. So I'm supportive of the 90-day moratorium. I think there's work to be done to understand our ordinance better. You know, again, this was something that there was no playbook for. I think the town did the best they could. They spent 2 years putting this together. There was significant updates last year. Clearly, those didn't go far enough and there's still opportunity to do more. I think that's what we're looking for this working group to do, is dig deeper. And I think some of the specific areas that both Councilor McGee and Councilor Hamel mentioned, I hope become within scope of that working group to explore. For me personally, you know, I really don't understand why we allow for marijuana in that overlay altogether. I really think that needs to be assessed, is not just for the Holly Street or Bickford Street, but that whole overlay. I'd like to understand from that working group, is that really appropriate in Scarborough for it to be there, period? And come back with a recommendation if that makes sense or not to have it there. I totally get that there's some establishments by the state that will be there. But, you know, even if it takes 20 years until they sell their property for someone new to come in, if that means we don't allow marijuana in there and it takes 20 years to get it out, I would be okay with that. But I really want the committee or the group to look into, really, is that district overall appropriate for marijuana? And then also, I think the comment has been raised, and I just want to reemphasize, you know, if we have an ordinance that we can't enforce, then why do we have any enforcements or fees in there at all? So I'd really like this group to really figure out, how do we legitimately hold a business accountable when they're not meeting our performance standards? So what are those performance standards that we can actually monitor, measure, and actually take action on, and make sure that that happens? I totally understand the frustration from the residents who've expressed that they've already engaged, and the first pass we tried to engage with the group, that, you know, there was a lot of great conversation. I think the owner at Snow Canning did make some adjustments and improvements based on that feedback, so I appreciate that, but the problem still exists and the full solution hasn't been found. So I'm going to ask the landowner to definitely be a part of the solution. I know they participated in the past, so I hope they continue to participate and really work hard to find what needs to happen in that facility to try and minimize the odor. You know, I think it's unfortunate that this one facility, which is a big problem, is you know, putting the entire industry in Scarborough at risk, because we have one facility that just can't seem to figure out what they need to do to manage an issue that is clearly a pervasive issue with residents in that area. So I would like to see that. And then I think that's it on my part. The one thing I also just want to correct the record is, again, the continued mischaracterization of the council and the discussions that we're having. The process we went through tonight was definitely the process that came out of ordinance that we all agreed. We felt like it was, or I felt like it was appropriate as chair to make sure we gave fair hearing to the two licenses, because I think, as Councilor Katarina eloquently stated, under our laws today, they're permitted. And while I think they've exposed likely some issues that we have that we need to address, I think allowing those existing businesses, or under our existing laws, allowing those to operate is appropriate, while we kind of put a pause at this point and allow us to really figure out how we can address this across the community. And I think 90 days isn't that long, as Councilor McGee said. I'm worried it might not be long enough, but I really hope that the growers, the business owners, the facility owners, the you know, we get the right people together that can really come to some real solid recommendations that we can really put this to bed. Counselor Katarina?
No, I'm not gonna call for the vote in.
Okay.
I was just making a point. Anyway, yeah, we've dug into a lot of different things today. There's obviously a lot of emotion running around this. I was chair of ordinance when all this started. And our expectation at that point was that we had to let it run for a couple years, and I fully expected we were gonna come back and say, is this working? What's not working? I would invite all of any of my fellow council members, members of the public, to please forward to me those things that you feel are topics that should be addressed by the working committee, because I am the council member of the working committee. Also, if you have an interest in serving, and I'm gonna say this without having talked to Mr. Gallagher, but we'll look at, you know, obviously, it'd be great to have 100 people on a working committee, but we know that doesn't work really well. So if you could, you know, if you wanted to forward your interest in why you feel that you could belong to the committee, but please know that the emails are open. The phones are, you know, you can call me 207-318-3440. I want to hear what you think should be addressed and why. And in the meantime, let's put this moratorium, a moratorium comes from Latin. And remember, I was a Latin teacher at one point. It means just a delay so we can think through things and double check and see where what we're doing right, what we're not doing right, and how we can hopefully make this work for everybody. So that's my piece.
All right. All right, I'm gonna call the vote. All those in favor? All right, it's unanimous. All right, next up is order number 23-020. Act on the request from the police chief to accept the following donations from the Jack Chevrolet 12x12 charity program in the amount of $1,200 and for Bank of America Charitable Gift Fund on behalf of Robert and Joan Carpenter Tricoli in the amount of $1,000. Tom, are you gonna tee this one up?
Yeah, there was a memo attached in the cover sheet from the chief of police. I think it's fairly self-explanatory. Council must take affirmative action to accept gifts of any sort. So that's why this matters in front of you.
Great. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? No? All those in favor? All right, it's unanimous. And we have no non-action items. So item number 11 is council member comments. Is there any comments? No? All right. Next item is item number 12, adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor? It's unanimous. All right, thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Got through those quickly, yeah.